Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I apologize for the longer hiatus. I had a very busy work week. Had a big change of stuff for me. But it's all good. Had also some family stuff to deal with. So that's why I also didn't have necessarily time to stream yesterday. So my schedule will not be quite as regular as it was like a year ago or so. But I will still try to make time for like 2 streams a week, occasionally 3 times. Definitely not 4 or 5 times as I did in my less busy timeline. And usually not streams that last around 3 to 4 hours, more like 1.5 to 2 to 2.5 hours, which I think is going to be a nice balance between like just me being able to come on more often, actually having more things to talk about, because usually once we talk for 3 hours, most topics are kind of talked out by that point, which is great. I still encourage you guys to join, make the live chat livelier. Obviously, the other YouTube jazz, subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting, growing the community, joining Discord. Always also just hunt for Twitter people for Discord, trying to ingest like more lifeblood there. So you will definitely be able to get more content out of me that isn't just YouTube, because this is a hobby. I'm not doing this for the money. I'm not doing this out of prestige or anything. I just enjoy talking to you guys. So whenever I have some time, doesn't interfere with the rest of my life, my goals, my plans, I'm very, very happy to be joining you here. I'm very, very happy to be getting your support, to be growing the community. But whenever I cannot, then I will quite honestly tell you, right? I won't tell you to like wait for me and like refresh the fucking YouTube page or something like that. But today we definitely have a lot to talk about. Now, we do have smaller rumors. That being said, we are still very much in the beginning of the iPhone 17 generation, so we are already getting iPhone 18 rumors. However, it's important to know that a lot of the stuff that's going to be talked about this early, this is stuff that usually fluctuates of like, oh, a future iPhone could be getting this feature, but is the future iPhone like the very next iPhone, in this case iPhone 18, iPhone 18 Pro, or are we talking more of an iPhone 19 feature, an iPhone 20 feature? So while I don't always talk down early rumors, I specifically talk down any kind of specificity about the time frame they are predicting. So, but there's some stuff that is widely corroborated by rumors that we have talked about already in the past about. So, for example, one thing that we're seeing is that the iPhone 18, again, this is the base iPhone 18. I saw some people getting confused, getting 50% more RAM. This means it's going up from 8 gigabytes of RAM to 12. That's partially because Samsung, SK Hynix, all these kinds of RAM suppliers, they really are not building like 9600 megatransfers per second RAM or 10,700 megatransfers per second RAM. They're not building that fastest LPDDR5X memory in 8 gigabyte capacities. Now, 8 gigabyte capacity could in theory mean for 2 gigabyte modules. It could mean 2 4 gigabyte modules. Depends a little bit on how exactly the memory bus is being set up. That being said, there will be just no way to give it 8 gigabytes and still use the fastest memory. Plus, Apple already has an established supply chain to get 12 gigabytes of very fast LPDDR5X memory. That's obviously the memory they're using on iPhone Air and iPhone Pro. So iPhone 18, which don't forget is not actually coming late next year or September of next year, it's rumored to get a spring 2027 launching together alongside an iPhone 18e and potentially an iPhone Fold 2. So yes, it makes absolutely total sense for this device to go from 8 to 12 gigs of RAM. Apple will have a lot more Apple Intelligence features by then. Apple will have large language model based Siri out by then. Even if you can argue what exactly is the quality of these features, or are they worth it? Are they worth the price, the battery consumption, whatever? they will be there, and Apple will be building their devices around it, similar to how they doubled memory on all Macs, right, not too long ago, even retroactively going back to M2 and M3 Macs and only keeping the 16 gigabytes of RAM configurations. And Apple, of course, went with 12 gigs of RAM on the iPhone 17 Pro, now the iPad Pro. So they're kind of keeping 8 gigabytes as more of a low-end solution right now. But I'm pretty sure that that will be pretty quickly overtaken by 12 gigabytes, and then 16 gigabytes will become the more standard or premium solution. And then, of course, if you look at M Pro, M Max chips, then we're talking obviously like 128 gigabytes. On the Ultras, we're talking 512 gigabytes of memory. So Apple definitely is making themselves known in the AI space by giving their devices more memory. We have Angelica already in the chat, one of our MarkTech Pro Max supporters. Guys, you can support this channel by becoming a channel member right here on YouTube or a supporter over on Patreon. Shout out to all our MarkTech Pro Max supporters. Thank you guys so much. Angelica already saying, yeah, I'm back. Long time no see, and she's looking forward to the news. Thank you so much for joining, and greetings back. Tigist Faris saying 2026 or 2027. This is by all current rumors, an early 2027 product. So I know, like, it seems just natural to say, oh, iPhone 17 was in 2025, iPhone 18 will be 2026. But supposedly the introduction of the iPhone Fold, plus some of the confusion with iPhone Air. Will Apple even continue it? How much will they upgrade it? How regularly will they update it? All of that is leading to the base iPhone model to be decoupled from the premium models. That's the Air, the Pros, and in the future, the Folds or Ultras, whatever Apple's going to call them. And I think that's partially because Apple wants to really maximize sales of their premium, highest revenue, highest profit devices, which launch at Christmas, or basically during the holiday season. And then the base model, which is absolutely capable of cannibalizing some of those sales, to be launching in the far less exciting spring season. Now, the people who are not high-tech nerds, they will probably not be running out and buying these devices as early adopters, regardless of when they come out. They'll just buy those devices first when they need it. That's when their previous device breaks, or when there's a birthday for them to get a gift for, or something like that, right? Or usually a holiday season, right? So Apple wants to steer those people away from the base model and tell them, look, if you're buying something for the holidays, the newest and shiniest thing, well, now that's a Pro, now that's an Air, now that's a Fold. Tiger is saying MacBook Pro early 2026. Yes. So we are basically seeing some models being decoupled. Like some models in a device category being decoupled from each other. We're seeing the base iPhone model actually launching later than the Pros, and with the MacBook, which is also a little bit what we see on the MacBook side with the MacBook Air, right? The MacBook Pro comes out before the MacBook Air, but now we are also seeing a differentiation between devices based on their chips. So the MacBook Pro, in this case, the M5 already launched, but the M5 Pro and the M5 Max-based MacBook Pro, including other devices, of course, that will be powered by those chips, like Mac Studio, potential Mac Pro, especially we get finally an M5 Ultra, finally a true next generation Ultra processor, right? So Apple is definitely moving some things around. We don't know if all of this is permanent or if some of that is just like short-term experimentation. Like maybe overall iPhone sales volumes drop because there's just going to be less models to sell at Christmas. Maybe Mac sales volume drops for similar reason if they keep delaying the Pros. Maybe they just delayed the MacBook right now, the M Pro and M Max chips, because those are supposedly chiplet based and they need more time in the oven than the base M5 MacBook Pro. That's the one that we're later gonna watch a review of together, right? So I'm not making like crazy long-term predictions like how Apple plans to treat the lineups like 2027, 2028 and beyond, but for around 2025, 2026 and early 2027, that's supposedly what we are getting. Don't forget, with the MacBooks, we are also looking towards a redesign, a 2 nanometer M6 chip, and a tandem OLED based MacBook Pro. So, and those are by the logic of the current update schedule, they would now be launching either late 2026, that's if Apple plans to give the base M series chip a redesign, a tandem OLED, and stuff like that, which honestly would be pretty complicated at $1,600. Apple likes high profit margins. What I could see happening is the base M6 MacBook Pro retaining, at least for a year, the same design, right, as it has right now. Retaining basically the same storage, the same RAM, but it comes out with an M6 2 nanometer chip. It's just better all around. It finally has a Wi-Fi 7 chip, maybe even one with 320 megahertz support. It might have an option for Apple C2X modem by then, right? So plenty of things to improve. But then my speculation is that the tandem OLED redesigned version would only come, at least at first, to the M Pro, or in this case M6 Pro, M6 Max MacBook Pros, right? And at that point, I could see Apple increasing their base price from maybe $2,000 for the 14-inch version to like $2,200. Apple could compensate for that by introducing basically 1 terabyte as the new base storage configuration, and at that point claim, look, the storage is still the same. Apple has done those tricks time and time again, and I think that most consumers have reacted pretty positively towards them, whether it's an iPhone Pro or an iPhone Pro Max. They've done that, where they removed the cheapest tier, but they moved up in higher in price with the same storage that was available at that price before, right? So we had a $1099 iPhone Pro Max that had 128 gigabytes. That was removed. The next version had only an $1199 version, but that one started at 256 gigabytes, which was already the price for the 256 gigabyte iPhone Pro Max before that. We have Riley joining the chat, one of our best supporters and Discord members. Hello, Riley. Very glad to see you all, guys. I know it's always hard to find your way to the streams. I know even if you hit the notification bell, it just doesn't always work out. So thank you so much for all your continued support. Just watching, liking, sharing, all of that helps. Of course, commenting if you want me to read out your opinions, your agreements, your disagreements. You can make it a super chat if you want to make it a guarantee that I read out your message. But I just like having you guys here. You improve me as a YouTuber, and I hope I provide you the content, the entertainment, the information that you guys crave. Some people I've seen speculate that 16 gigabyte would become then the configuration for the iPhone 18 Pro Max, Pro and Pro Max. However, I have to say that I don't think is very believable. All rumors that we got prior to this, not that this even says something about it, basically pointed that the entire iPhone 18 family would have 12 gigabytes standard. And in fact, we've had multiple generations of iPhone that had the same amount of memory across the base version, across the Plus version, across the Pro version. So going back to something like iPhone 11 and iPhone 11 Pro and Pro Max all had 4 gigabytes of the same kind of memory. iPhone 14, all of those devices had 6 gigs of memory. iPhone 16, all of them had 8 gigs of memory, and all using the same 7500 megatransfers per second memory, right? So just because the base iPhone model is moving up in terms of the RAM it has, doesn't mean that the Pro model necessarily has to follow and add similarly 4 gigs of RAM or something like that. Tigers, you're saying buy, but then you keep chatting, saying MacBook Pro, M5 Pro, or Max. Well, they're coming early 2026. And my personal preference, honestly, this time around, I couldn't tell you. Because if they're going with a chiplet architecture, right? I might try to draw you what I think that could mean later on. But it will depend on how big they make the GPU. Like, honestly, more CPU power? No, like I don't need more CPU power basically than it's even in the base M5 in a way, especially with single core. But with GPU, like, would I pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars extra for 40 compute units, 60 compute units? Really depends how well it scales, what the impact is on cooling and battery life, right? But if the Pro stays limited to 20 cores, then it might similarly be too underpowered. So it really depends. If maybe the chiplet architecture allows for the Pro chip to have like 30 cores or something like that, or even match the 32 GPU cores that I have in my M1 Max. But now these cores are, of course, have support for mesh shading, dynamic caching, hardware accelerated ray tracing. All of them have neural accelerators that help out with Metal FX performance, all that stuff, right? Even memory bandwidth might actually still be technically lower than the 400 gigabits per second that my MacBook gives. It still would be way faster, even on half the bus size. So just trying to make the point, it really, this time it's actually more interesting around, I would argue, because we don't exactly know how Pro and Max will scale in the way we did in prior generations. Riley, is there a more refined 3 nanometer coming in 2026? No. So there is nothing truly better than N3P. Knowing TSMC, they will probably find some way to like rebrand higher yield, slightly more refined N3P in a year or so. They always do that. So there are different versions of N3 as like high-end N3. This is N3X, which is more designed for servers, and N3A, which is designed for automotives. So none of that has a direct benefit for Apple. And even then, like, all current research and development at TSMC is just going into refining GAAFET to make sure that backside power delivery works, right? So where in previous years you could argue that continuously refining FinFET, right, 3 nanometer versus 5 nanometer versus 7, all of that actually had benefits for prior nodes because the core technology was still the same. That's why 6 nanometer, which is a third generation 7 nanometer node, right, what actually got pretty close in the end, right, to first generation 5 nanometer. It was still worse, and by that point it was way worse than N5P or N4, but these nodes kind of helped each other. But no, we are not looking at like N2.8 or something like that as like the last FinFET node. They could still do it, but they haven't yet announced anything like that. And I think it would detract from their marketing for 2 nanometer, which supposedly is much more expensive. I've seen some contradictory rumors about it. And they definitely want as many high-end customers switching to 2 nanometer as possible, whether it's Apple, NVIDIA, even in this case now Intel, AMD, obviously. So no, I don't think that next, like early 2026, we will be seeing 2 nanometer. I think 2 nanometer is probably happening around the second half of next year. And after that, I do think we are seeing 2 nanometer, and then I think we're actually seeing pretty quickly a turnaround for late 2027 to actually get A16. So I know there's like the question, like supposedly Nvidia is getting N2P while Apple is still on N2, and that's because they're launching their products like half a year later or so. Honestly, the difference between 2 nanometer and N2P is not going to be that big of a deal. But my speculation is actually that Apple is going to be the first and for a while the only buyer of A16, and A16 is actually a way bigger deal than 2 nanometer to N2P, because that's the node that finally introduces backside power delivery from TSMC. We already have that in Intel's 18A, but then again, it's a first generation implementation. 18A is more competitive with N3P than it is with upcoming N2 and N2P. So we'll have to see how Intel's success keeps scaling in the future. One last rumor for Apple for the future that I wanted to quickly react to is iPhone 18 Pro supposedly getting satellite connectivity. In this case, not emergency satellite connectivity that would work for specific features like calling or location sending or SMS sending, but actually full-on 5G satellite internet that's supposedly enabled by Starlink and SpaceX, obviously an Elon Musk company, with all the problems that unfortunately that entails. There is some rumoring that could make this true, like so Globalstar is currently Apple's major partner for their satellite emergency services. Globalstar has hinted in their quarterly earnings report that they are about to be losing one major customer, so that would be very interesting if it means Apple is just jumping to SpaceX across the board, and with that also potentially getting a feature like full-on 5G connectivity on the iPhone through satellite services. Now, what the impact of that would be on battery life and actual speed, don't forget, like Starlink obviously requires like its own antenna dish to connect to SpaceX's services. We'll have to see. And again, don't forget, it doesn't have to be necessarily the iPhone 18 Pro. It could be a feature that gets delayed by a year or two. Maybe it requires Apple building a much more custom antenna and modem solution. We'll have to see how it pans out. Guess price increases are happening then, or reuse chips? Well, not for this year, right? But no, also people misunderstand what pricing means for 2 nanometer for Apple. First of all, 50% is not happening. Like, I've seen some people say this is one rumor. We've had also rumors saying 20%. That really depends on like what exactly Apple negotiates, especially as, don't forget, Apple is first come, first served at TSMC. Yes, unfortunately, the entire AI craze is making these companies basically agree to any price available. Like, because Nvidia can sell their server class hardware with like 70% profit margins, which is unheard of for a hardware product, right? Yeah, they can afford to pay whatever TSMC asks of them. At that point, on a product this complicated, the actual like networking solutions that interconnect all of these chips, the actual like, especially if they're doing it like chiplet architecture, the interconnects, the high-speed memory, everything from HBM memory to even very fast GDDR7 memory, all of that adds to the cost, probably more than just a switch from one node to the other. And so they can easily eat that up without even really impacting their margins, because there's so much other cost happening. And the same is true in a way for Apple. Like, don't forget, like, sure, an Apple chip is expensive, but Apple has high quality OLED screens. Apple builds now their own Wi-Fi and modems and 5G modems that cost money. There are all the small features from speakers, haptics, microphones, microphones, all the little buttons, right? I'm not saying that the chip is not a main factor of the cost of a device, but it's not so, like if it adds $50 to the build cost of an iPhone, that could potentially change its margins a lot. But it's Apple. Apple has always found a way to deal with that. Like iPhone 10 was very expensive to make, and they compensated for that with iPhone XS Max being $100 more expensive in a way. So at that point, a lot of people actually thought, well, iPhone 10 was a big redesign, and similar to how original iPhone 2G became cheaper with iPhone 3G, a lot of people expected the iPhone XS to actually be $100 cheaper, so $899, and then the XS Max would be $999. But Apple did not do that. They said, no, $999, $1099. But then after that, they kept the same pricing for years and years, even when switching to more expensive materials like titanium. Now they might have switched back to aluminum, but they've introduced much more expensive cooling solutions like vapor chambers. They've kept the prices roughly the same while introducing 5G, which 5G modems were massively more expensive than 4G antennas. They've kept the same pricing while doubling storage to 128 gigabytes of storage. They've kept the same prices while doubling memory to 8 gigs of memory, and even while going to 256 base storage and 12 gigs of memory, prices only changed insofar as they removed the base $9.99 and $10.99 versions, but still priced 256 at $10.99 and $11.99 as before. So Apple is absolutely capable of dealing with cost increases for individual components. Don't forget, there is no rumor about more storage or more memory next year, right? So if Apple can just mass order as much of those components, that's a way to do that. If they can make their new modems much better than before, maybe they can even cheap out a little bit on the antenna system, right? Like, again, none of these are exact predictions, but just they can also like find more ways to subsidize cost through carriers, right? If they have a brand new features like 5G satellite internet, right, they could say to SpaceX and Starlink basically, look, we can go to carriers, we can make them accept this feature, even though it could potentially eat into their own margins and stuff like that, and have a good revenue share model for everyone. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about pricing. I think Apple has proven over the last 10 years that while yes, they're definitely greedy and they like high profits, they're not in the market of pricing every consumer out of products they're already buying. Sometimes Apple will do silly things like pricing Apple Vision Pro at $3,500. I think even at $2,500, it would have attracted a lot more people. But yeah, so I wouldn't worry too much. Guess price increases. Okay, good. I already read that. Good. Then there's a little bit of Samsung stuff. So this is not necessarily something I'm too interested in. If you're looking into Samsung as like a main Apple competitor and just are interested in them that way, that's primarily how I cover them. Supposedly there's a delay inside the production schedule for the Galaxy S26 series that involves the S26 and now supposedly an S26 Plus entering mass production in January, while the S26 Ultra is still on track for a December production date. So supposedly Samsung canceled the Galaxy S26 Edge. That one basically sold initially a little bit and then kind of stopped selling. Supposedly something similar is happening with the iPhone Air as well. Well, I guess we'll see about that in the future. But basically, Samsung kind of planned to make a Galaxy S26 Pro, basically a Pro in name only. That would kind of be a base Galaxy S26 that's just better than the S25, but there was nothing really pro about it. And they kind of planned on removing the S26 Plus in favor of the S25, S26 Edge in the lineup. But now that the Edge doesn't exist, they kind of have to make an S26 Plus, which also kind of means that supposedly the Galaxy S26 Pro might just be a Galaxy S26, or we might see an S26 and an S26 Pro. I've heard some contradictory stuff, though most seem to point out that we might end up with the exact generational lineup as we had before. So an S26 at the bottom, an S26 Plus in the middle, and then an S26 Ultra at the top. No Edge models, no Pro rebrandings, and basically flips and folds would come in later. That also means, of course, that we might see more experimenting with Exynos chips, as Samsung is looking to bring down pricing of these devices, or to be more precise, to not have to increase pricing, because so much of the modern components, as we have discussed, for example, with 2 nanometer here, is actually getting more and more expensive. So Samsung having a way to actually support their own 2 nanometer factories and potentially make their devices actually a little bit cheaper to make than if they used a Galaxy, if they used a Qualcomm chip. That could happen. We'll have to see in what exact markets we'll see Exynos chips, in what exact markets we'll see the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5. We might actually see a Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 that's built on Samsung's 2 nanometer node. So we might see a much more fragmented lineup of processors than we've seen in the last 2 to 3 years from Samsung. And I think a lot of people will be very apprehensive, even if Samsung's 2 nanometer node is way better than their previous 4 nanometer node or something like that. I think the Exynos branding is just such horseshit in the eyes of many consumers. I kind of hope that they have the mindset to rebrand it. If they just call it Exynos 2600, and it just feels like, oh, Exynos 2400, 2500, but newer, even though it's a massive leap with like GAFET node and stuff like that, I just hope they don't mess this up. But I guess we'll have to see. But that's about it for all the smaller leaks and rumors and news. We do definitely have Apple hardware that has launched across this week and was introduced, of course, last week with Apple's newsroom pages. And thank you guys for making my summary video about those announcements actually quite a good success. Haven't had a video in the tens of thousands of views for quite a while. Always still a recommendation though to try engage more with videos, comments, likes and stuff like that, but just views of course help the channel as well. But I would like to actually, we haven't reacted to them for quite a while. I would like to react to MaxTech today because they actually have done some pretty good side-by-side comparisons between the current M5 devices and the previous generation M4 devices. And I would like to critically analyze Marques's review or impressions video of Apple's M5 Vision Pro. And while I don't necessarily right now have one great AVP review to recommend, I do recommend just going on Twitter and looking at a lot of accounts that have like the virtual reality headset emoji next to their bios and next to their profile names, basically. And you will see them being so much more informed, so much more enthusiastic, not just about Apple Vision Pro, but also about Samsung Galaxy XR and just virtual or mixed reality hardware overall. So yeah, Marques unfortunately really is slipping in my opinion. He definitely is focusing a lot more on the sleekness of his videos. There are a lot of smaller mistakes that keep piling up. There is also content about like M5 from Geekervan, which we usually look MacBook 2. However, their last reviews have not been so in-depth. I assume they just didn't have the time they usually have. For example, the thing that was most missing to me was actually good power consumption stats, especially when they tested Spec 2017. So I will keep an eye out on that. I'll keep on an eye out on Geekervan, on Xiaobai, and of course, you guys feel free to inform me here in the comment section or over on Discord. What I should be reacting to, but I think these 3 videos will make a nice first wave of summaries for us. Tigis, you're just typing in ... I'm not sure if that means you're kind of censoring yourself or you're kind of experiencing a malfunction on your keyboard. Maybe your cat is typing something for you, but I hope you're okay, man.
Is the new...
Okay, as you can also see, by the way, YouTube has to redesign. I hate absolutely every icon in here. This looks like, I don't know, this looks like a more childish look simultaneously, as well as some kind of hippie bullshit style. I hate it, and it's not that I hate everything that's new. That's kind of what I feel about people like Snazzy Labs, like Quinn Nelson, who also hates this new YouTube design. Like, I hate the thumbs up and thumbs down. It's just a lot of it feels like not everything is fully aligned with each other. There are like some baffling size differences. Like, look at how small the numbers are of the actual like progression here. But it doesn't look too dysfunctional overall, though there's a lot of overlap between each other, right? Like, if you want to know, oh, what is this? Oh, it's subtitles closed caption, but it overlays now with that. I don't know, couldn't they do it sideways? But yeah, just that's a little bit of a rant. I'll probably keep talking more about this whenever we react to other YouTube videos. We'll have to see. Riley saying people keep their iPads for longer so Apple can do small updates for longer. Also, don't forget, the iPad inarguably, got the bigger upgrade this year over the Mac, right? Plus, that's just on top of the tandem OLED iPad redesign that we got last year. Accumulatively, when you look at the last 2 iPad upgrades, not only that, 3 iPad Pro updates, because Apple actually did not give the iPad Pro an M3 chip, so we jumped from M2 to M4, so we had a giant increase in performance, right? We had to redesign, we had tandem OLED, and now here we are basically a little bit over a year later, and now we're looking at the M5 chip, especially a massive GPU upgrade. We're looking now also at the use of 2 other new Apple chips inside, like a new Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth 6 modem in the form of N1. We're looking at C1X as the optional 5G modem if you're willing to pay a little bit extra. So while yes, I wish we could have gotten some new stuff in there, mainly my biggest ask would have been the 24 megapixel front camera from the iPhone 17 series, but I still think the upgrades here are really good. Compared to iPhone, of course, I think people keep their Macs for longer. Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. I was comparing here primarily iPad versus Mac because those are the 2 reviews we're going to be looking at. But yeah, versus iPhone, I think upgrading every 3 to 4 years is very, very common to sometimes faster on the iPhone side, while on the iPads, I think it's more 4 to 5 years, with some even going beyond that, especially if you look at buying like a cheap iPad that's used by multiple family members. Like, unless that iPad breaks, people might keep that like for 6-7 years or something like that. And then, of course, on the Mac side, that really depends on your own upgrade preferences. Maybe you have like a store that actually allowed you to get like some regular upgrade stuff, but I think there we are more looking at like 5 to 6 year upgrade schedules. It seems that the early have to upgrade or FOMO people are mostly the iPhone crowd. Yeah, I agree. I think there's also just like a bigger market for iPhone overall. So that creates a bigger market for iPhone coverage on YouTube and stuff like that. And that creates more FOMO and stuff like that. So it's a little bit like a snake that's eating its own tail. It's kind of like a fulfilling prophecy. Tiger saying stupid 10 years ago for life. Well, I actually don't fully disagree. My original iMac that I got, my very first Mac that I owned, was actually the late 2012 iMac with Core i7 chip, with I believe the GeForce GTX 680 MX. So that was the 2 gigabytes of VRAM card at that time, which is funny because right around that time we got the PS4, which got 8 gigs of RAM, out of which 6 gigabytes were usable. So even though the raw power in my iMac actually was very competitive and even ahead of a PS4, but because it had so much less video memory, it just wasn't as good. It wouldn't hold the same quality textures and stuff like that. That's just one way how consoles usually push the market forward. And I kept that iMac from early 2013 to late 2021. So that's my M1 Max MacBook Pro is now basically exactly 4 years old. Not quite even. I believe I got it in November or something like that, just around time for my birthday. And well, we are getting close there. It's almost the end of October. But yeah, absolutely. Like 10 years is absolutely possible. And what you will find, Tigis, I don't know if you have watched my videos before and you're just commenting more, or if that's absolutely your first time for everything on here. Like, this is not a FOMO channel. I will never criticize people for having older hardware. I don't tell even people to necessarily switch away from Android or Windows if they feel like, first, they really need those solutions for certain work stuff or whatever, right? But also don't forget that sometimes it's just their preference. Maybe it aligns better with their need for gaming on Windows, right? You have a lot more native applications, or there's still a lot of 3D software and stuff like that that's Windows exclusive, even in like the AutoCAD family of software, right? So yeah, this is a channel that's really much more chill. I like interacting with you guys, just talking to 2-3 people at a time, getting your opinions, your agreements, disagreements. I'm not here to tell you, buy Apple hardware and buy the newest one and buy the most expensive one. That's simply not who I am, and I hope I'll never turn into this. 4 years ago for first live. Wait, really? Are you like a complete OG viewer, but with a name that I don't recognize? That would be crazy.
M5 MacBook Pro, good enough to buy this new compared to buying a used old M4 model for less? Well, we're gonna find out in this video by testing everything, including performance, thermal throttling. Yes, we have the FLIR thermal cam right here. We're actually gonna see if Apple changed anything on the inside with the cooling system and fans, since this one only has a single fan, and we're gonna test everything else that reviewers did not mention. You can see we have the base model with 16 gigs of RAM, 512 gigs of storage, M5 chip. Unboxing it, of course, we have the same wallpaper. We got the silver model this time around. So now let's see what's on the inside. All right, whoa guys, I just found a really curious difference. Here on the M4, it says, designed by Apple in California, assembled in China.
With Rosa joining the chat, hi.
Nothing about China at all. I wonder if it's not assembled in China anymore, because
that
the Vision
maybe
Pro has
if
been
the stream is
confirmed
longer,
to be moved
YouTube
from
actually is
China
more likely to
Vietnam
recommend it.
assembly. That's interesting.
We're almost
All
an hour
and my
into the
favorite
stream,
part of the
so
moment
maybe that
of
helps.
truth, and it looks like we still just have a single fan for that.
So I don't share their disappointment with the single fan. If you look at this, you'll find that the main problem with the one fan here is not actually the one fan. So first of all, this fan could be larger and be absolutely fine. But even more importantly, this heatsink could be way larger. You could literally extend it over there and stuff like that. You could make it thicker and just pile up more memory. You could make this heat pipe a lot more thicker and stuff like that, right? You could make it literally like half the die and stuff like that. You could just slap more copper versus aluminum in the entire heatsink here. So yeah, there's a lot that could be happening. Obviously, one of the best things that they could introduce would be a vapor chamber here. It could work even simultaneously with just graphite and copper heat sheets and stuff like that, because if it adds another 10 watts of really easily movable heat, right, doesn't mean that it would be like that the entire cooling system would be limited to 10 watts. It just would mean that 10 watts out of 20 or even a peak 30 watts would be way better managed than it is right now, which especially for shorter peaks could actually make sure that maybe the fan actually runs quieter. And stuff like that, or the device just gets less hot overall. There will be some things in this video that I disagree with that primarily go back to this question of cooling. Primarily this fear of temperatures that are right above 100 degrees Celsius, as if, like, I always want to like remind people, this is not water. Nothing here evaporates at over 100 degrees. In fact, like, when you look at some of the reactions on a processor, like there is temperatures here way higher than 100 degrees potentially. So nothing here immediately melts, nothing here immediately decomposes. Plus, we'll actually get to some gen-on-gen temperature comparisons. Plus, I'll add some details on why we might be getting more problems with heat gen to gen, even if power consumption doesn't necessarily increase. I'll talk about heat trapping with newer nodes and stuff like that. So again, if you are nerdy, if you're interested in these kinds of details, stay tuned.
M5 chip. We can see we have
it's not a big
SSD
fan overall. Like
right
Apple
here,
could move some stuff here a little bit to this side and then just
a minute, and everything else.
But I guess they want to reuse this fan, right? Also with the dual fan MacBooks, so and then just use this space for the other fan. Which I would love to see a comparison between these devices, because Apple uses some of this space here, but I guess some of this is pretty easily movable, right? Like these are the SSD modules. I assume some of that could be like the Wi-Fi card here or something like that. Yeah, none of that is too complicated to reroute on a motherboard. You can also see we don't actually have, well, okay, I'm not sure if that would actually be correct, but like it doesn't seem like the motherboard is that dense with VRMs and something like that, which for a 30 watt peak system, that actually does make sense. But then again, Apple does have this multi-layer approach, not necessarily on the Mac where they have like dual-sided motherboards or whatever, but I mean like just that a lot of stuff gets covered up, just even for aesthetical reasons with how Apple operates.
Looks to be pretty much exactly identical. No differences in the cooler size, nothing. So wow, looks like the M5 is pretty efficient. Now, since we know nothing changed about the design or the internals, let's just jump right into performance. We have Blackmagic disks.
So that's important. Apple promised faster SSD speeds, and I was actually correct. So we will get to the iPad Pro video later on, but very importantly here, they did not just upgrade all storage necessarily to like full PCIe 4x4, so that would be 7,000 megabits per second or something like that. No, but they basically still keep a hierarchy where the 256 gigabyte model, especially on the iPad, is still slower. On the Macs, the 256 gigabyte version has been the same speed since the after the M2 disaster, where it was half the speed of the 512 and 1 terabyte versions. But now that Apple has doubled the speed, I think they will be much more comfortable, not just on iPad, which we do have data for already, but also on the Mac to differentiate the 256 gigabyte versions, not only in storage capacity, but also in storage speed. So you would have 3.5 gigabits per second on the iPad, or is it gigabytes per second? I actually always forget. Is that a big B or a small b? on the 256 gig configuration, and then 7 gigabits, 7,000 megabits on the high-end version. Riley saying, I hate fans, passive cooling supremacy. Don't forget, though, that fans don't necessarily need to be super active to still provide some cooling. You will still have some air movement throughout the chassis, even if the fans are not fully on. Plus, fans are usually connected to a beefier cooling solution, right? And if you run the fans at like 1500 RPM, you basically cannot hear them in most rooms. Like, unless you exist in like a isolated sound chamber, I don't think that's going to negatively impact you.
Let's test it on both of these, see how the SSDs have improved, and holy
twice the speed.
Smokes, that is insanely fast. 6,300 read compared to 2,000.
So this is important. So both read and write, but also especially read, can really fluctuate between tests. So you should never run a disk speed test at like just once. You should really make this test run like 10 times and isolate the completely unrealistic results in either direction, and then create an aggregate average of like the more sensible results. Plus, of course, this test can vary depending on how large your file is and stuff like that. So yeah, keep that in mind whenever you're doing the testing. Read is a little bit complicated.
On the M4, literally triple the read speed. That's going to help you with overall snappiness, opening.
And you can see here, right, think of now a theoretical MacBook Air, right, and cut that speed in half. At worst, that would mean it's the same speed as this one, but it could actually end up being faster than the previous generation. Plus, I think that Apple's expectation for the MacBook Air or 256 gigabyte devices in general, whether it's an iPad or an iPhone, don't forget the iPhone 17 series also has faster storage than before, but the 256 roughly matches the previous generation's 1 terabyte configurations, but while the 512, 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte models, I actually haven't seen 2 terabytes, so I will not speak for that one, while those are actually about here, right? So they're about half the speed of the MacBooks, which is the speed of the previous generation MacBooks. So that's actually quite good. And I think Apple's expectation is simply, if you have a 256 gigabyte device, then you're probably not even playing around that much with large language. You're probably not even playing around with that many demanding games or video files for like Final Cut editing or DaVinci Resolve. So you might as well get slightly slower storage with it, right? Which honestly isn't that wrong, and it obviously helps with their profit margin. So we've talked about in the past, well, how will Apple deal with pricing once 2 nanometers like 20 to 30 to 50% more expensive? Apple, similar to life in the Jurassic Park movie franchise, Apple finds a way, usually.
Apps, everything else. Write speed, 6,068 compared to 3,200. That's almost twice as fast. We are now finally getting the super fast SSDs on the M5. And now jumping into Geekbench 6, you can see we have the same macOS version. Everything's fully updated, and the M5 now has 4.61 gigahertz clock speed compared to 4.42 on the M4. That's 4.3% higher clock speed, which basically means we should expect at least that big of a difference in single core. Of course, we both have 16 gigs of RAM. Thank you, Apple, for giving us that. So let's run the CPU benchmark. And there you go, we have our scores. Holy moly, guys. 16% faster single core, up to 4263. That is the highest recorded single.
So I've actually posted a Geekbench review into my thumbnail. That one actually got over 4,300. The iPad, which actually retains the 4.4 gigahertz max clock speed of the M4 generation, goes up to 4150. So we see very nice scaling with the clock speeds. You could even make the argument that maybe IPC is ever so slightly better on the iPad side. Maybe there's just 1 to 2% more stability at that 4.4 gigahertz. But yeah, we see here scaling that goes above. Obviously, now we look at the previous generation, right? This is now where we get IPC gains plus clock speed gains, plus obviously the chip overall benefits from things like more cache. Now, on the P cores themselves, we don't actually have more cache from what I understand, but obviously the E cores have 50% more L2 cache. There's larger system level cache. At least if we go by the A19 logic. I don't know yet the exact numbers of system level cache for Apple's M chips. Unfortunately, websites or outlets like Geekervan don't give us those numbers, even though they seem to know everything else, which is a little bit crazy to me. Yeah. Oh, Kev Chata, hello, long time. Yeah, I actually remember you from the M4 reveals exactly a year ago. So yeah, welcome back to the stream, brother. Really glad to be seeing some familiar faces, to have you guys in the live chat. I actually didn't yet have time to review the reviews of M5 devices, so that's where we're at. We just started the first Max Tech video about the M5 MacBook Pro. We talked a little bit about new Apple news and rumors. So yeah, you didn't actually miss out on much.
Core score, the new M5 chip, absolutely insane. And the crazy thing is, we had the SVE2 and SME support added last time with the M4, which gave it a huge boost. This time, it has the same support, but we're still getting 16% crazy. For multi-core, same 10-core CPU, but 20% higher score. This is
this is getting dangerously close to even like the last generation M4 Pro and stuff like that, especially if you look at the binned versions. Kevchat is saying, I bought MacBook... Oh, I actually remember you discussing like what you would want to buy last time. I bought MacBook Air M4 15-inch, barely use it because still using the 2015 MacBook Pro 15-inch. Wait, are you forced to use that one? Do you need like some x86 applications? Because what else would be the reason? Like if we are looking at the 15-inch MacBook Pro, there's literally nothing that it does better than the MacBook Air at this point, right? Like usually even an older MacBook Pro might come with better speakers or better display than the MacBook Air. Or sometimes like an older iPad Pro might have better portability than a new MacBook. Like that's, for example, why I use my M1 iPad Pro more than my M1 Max MacBook Pro. But why would you do that, right? Because in this case, your Apple Silicon M4 MacBook Air is just superior to your 2015 MacBook Pro in every way.
Forming like the M1 Ultra Mac, and you can get it in a 14-inch laptop for $1,600. That's crazy. And now let's test Speedometer 3.1. This is basically a web browser benchmark to kind of measure how snappy your machine's gonna be for browsing the web and web-based apps. Oh, I almost forgot to mention we charged both of these to 100%. So let me go ahead and unplug them, and that way we're gonna test the battery life as well. And there you go, 20% faster on the M5, scoring 60.2 points. That's the highest recorded score. This is essentially the world's fastest computer for browsing the web and everything.
It should also be noting that when you're looking, oh God, wait, does Safari do that? Did I turn that off, that the corners don't fully align with this? Or is like my latest, like I know it does that here with the menu bar, but to me this actually always looked good in macOS Tahoe. It just looked like a symmetrical like swap. Plus because the menu bar is now transparent, it doesn't impact the visuals. Is this a bug? Or why doesn't Safari do that for me? I actually cannot test it right now because I have my MacBook Pro set to 1080p. But that's very interesting. Kev Chata saying, notice 2015 MacBook Pro speakers are still better than MacBook Air M4. Also, browsing web seems identical in speed. That's interesting because there will be so much other things that will still be faster. Just launching Safari, even without something, will be faster. But I mean, I get, but this is why I tell people to not upgrade unless you feel the reason to do so. Plus, I always recommend updating kind of in the family, right? Or in the class of device or higher. Which I know some people will say, well, iPhone 17 is better value than iPhone Pro, whatever. I'm like, yeah, but if you're coming from an iPhone Pro in the past and you're used to having stuff like a telephoto camera, right? Then the iPhone 17 is still gonna have downsides. I did not expect the M4 MacBook Air to have any downsides versus such an old MacBook Pro. I know Apple has always had good speakers on the Pro, while the Airs, it took them a while to get the same ones. But I thought that the 2024 MacBook Air, or it's actually a 2025 MacBook Air, it came out early this year. I expected it would have better speakers, or at least equivalent speakers to a 2015 MacBook Pro, especially since we're talking about the 15-inch version, right? Which is more roomy and bassy than the 13-inch. I'm a little bit surprised by that.
Everything else. And now let's move over to the graphics. We have
guys, we've been streaming for exactly an hour now. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for making this live chat so lively. You guys know I love interacting with you, getting your opinions, your agreements, your disagreements, your own experiences. Feel free to, of course, chat more. Feel free to send the occasional super chat if you feel like it. You can also become a long-term supporter of this channel by becoming a channel member. Shout out to all our MarkTech Pro Max supporters. Or you can become a supporter over on Patreon. However you want to do it. Usually it's easier for me to actually keep track of the YouTube channel members because that shows up right next to your profile, but I get a bigger percentage of the money if you support over on Patreon. So however you want to do that, and beyond all that, just like, subscribe, comment, share out the video to anybody who think might enjoy it. It just all helps tremendously.
Geekbench 6's metal test. Once again, we have the same 10-core GPU, but Apple did add neural accelerators into each GPU core. Once again, crazy numbers right here, 34% faster on the M5.
So here we see scaling very much in line with what the A19 Pro chip, Pro chip did. The A19 Pro got you roughly 35 to 38% more GPU performance. That's with the same amount of cores, and this is with a test that's not necessarily gonna benefit from the better ray tracing or the neural accelerators. So this is pretty much raw compute. We see that power consumption has gone up roughly 10, maybe 15% to accommodate that 35% leap. So it's more efficient, but also more power hungry. Those things are not contradictory. So yeah. I also want to, just because we have some people here that I'm not sure know the drill these days, I just want to leave the Discord link in the live chat right now to make sure you guys know where you can join, where you can have nice discussions with me, with other community members and stuff like that. So I just posted the link in the comment section. Kevchata, FYI, recently Alex Ziskind, YouTuber, showed how iOS 26 is draining battery more than previous. Yeah, I know. It has not been my experience. My MacBook runs pretty much exactly how I expected to. Now, has it gotten maybe a little bit worse over the years in general? Sure. Maybe it impacts something like a MacBook Air that has like a smaller battery more. But to me, these differences are completely negligible. They're super small. Plus, how much time are you actually really spending here, right? Like sure, I have like my menu bar and stuff like that open, whatever. But when I play a game, it's full screen. When I'm reading a web page, it's usually as much full screen as possible. So yes, kind of in the worst case scenario, you are like, this is something that I've been telling since like Drew started from Tailosive Tech, started talking about like more power draw and stuff like that from iOS 26 and macOS Tahoe. I have always said, yes, these things across your control center, your notification center, even your home menu on the Mac, the dock, and stuff like that, they will be more expensive to run. But that higher expense is such a small percentage of your overall power consumption, of your overall memory needs, of your overall system resource needs, of your dedicated threads and stuff like that, of your GPU core shaders, that it's not going to make a big difference. Plus, don't forget, we're still very early on. Like, I personally can attest to the fact that iOS 26.1, macOS 26.1, which are all betas that I'm currently running on my devices, partially to give you guys my impressions on those. Which, for that, actually, feel free to join the Discord. That's where I have most beta discussions, because I find that beta discussions don't usually translate too well to my usual live stream content, but I still like to talk about it. And now, for example, with 26.1, that's across iOS, across iPadOS, across macOS, you're even getting a new liquid glass design option, clear, which was before, but now you can also make it tinted. So yeah, which should also consume a little bit less energy. It's not yet fully refined. It just launched in the first version. It looks much better in dark mode than it does in bright or light mode, but it will be an alternative for those who are not massive lovers of the current state of liquid glass. So always take that with a little bit of grain of salt whenever somebody just says, oh, it makes it worse. It can make it worse, but is it meaningfully worse? Is that trade-off worth it for you? These are very much more interesting discussions to me than just, oh, is it objectively 1 or 2% worse?
To 76,000 points. That is getting up there, I believe, close to the M2 and M3 Pro performance. Yep.
Yeah, plus, again, with features like dynamic caching, it will probably just be faster than those chips in modern apps, like really demanding stuff like Cyberpunk. Plus, its memory bandwidth deficit versus for something like the M3 Pro is basically non-existent. Don't forget, with M3 Pro, actually experimented a little bit and went down from a 256-bit bus to a 192-bit bus. So in this case, the 128-bit bus on the M5, because it's using so much faster memory, it's using 9600 mega transfers per second memory versus 6400, the M3 Pro and the base M5 actually end up having the exact same memory bandwidth. Add to that just architectural improvements, like M3 was the first generation of dynamic caching, was the first generation of ray tracing. None of them are that good at accelerating Metal FX. Like, you will get a better experience on base M5.
Just checked, we have the M3 Pro 18 core, that's the unbinned model. You have to pay extra to
so
upgrade.
I believe my Mac performs at like 120,000 or something like that, the M1 Max, so it's still theoretically way faster than a base M series chip, but it's not as far ahead as one might think, given it has 32 cores, given it has like 2.5 times as much memory bandwidth and stuff like that.
2 is at around 79,000. Man, that's insane. And now let's move on to comparing web design using Figma. This is a project provided to us by 500 Designs, one of the best.
No, Tigers, we are beyond beta 1. I think maybe you mean like 26.1, the betas. But yeah, we are now at 26.1 beta 4 at this point. And actually, beta 4 is interesting because it feels a little bit more micro-stuttery than beta 3. But then again, I'm not sure. My recommendation for all of you who are still holdouts is to wait until 26.1. Wait, no. There's no chance that 26.2 beta 1 came out today, because today is a Saturday. Apple does not release betas on a Saturday. You will not get me like this. But yeah, my recommendation for the holdouts among you is to wait until 26.1. for your iPhones and iPads, and maybe even all the way until 26.2 for your Macs. Now, there are some reasons to upgrade sooner, like for example, by the time games and apps start getting updated to Metal 4, you really want to utilize that, especially on newer hardware. But before that, you probably have little reason to force yourself.
Design studios based out of California. So what I'm gonna do is select 12 layers right here, 4x PNG. Let's go ahead and update, and I'm gonna time how long it takes on each machine. They both just finished. The M4 took 2 minutes and 2 seconds. The M5 took 1 minute and 38. That's about 24.
So this, I assume that the actual difference on the website was pretty negligible. This is an export test, so I assume you actually benefited from the faster SSD. So my speculation here is that the actual real world experience for most people using very lightweight browser stuff like this is basically going to be meaningless. Like, you will not even feel that difference of those 24 seconds. And this is why I always recommend, similar to how you, Kevchata, talked about like your real world differences between an old MacBook Pro and the current MacBook Air, there might be some features on older hardware that like have been so far ahead of the curve at that point that even some lower end but current hardware does not necessarily replace it. So for example, a test like this, even though, for example, my M1 Max MacBook Pro has wildly lower single core performance than any of these devices, M3, M4, M5, right? But because it basically has 7,000 megabits per second SSD for exporting time, my assumption is that this test would probably be not that much slower on my old but high-end MacBook Pro. Kevchata saying, I would have bought MacBook Pro with M4 if it was available in 15-inch. Extra inch makes the difference with aging eyes. Yeah, the extra inch makes the difference. That's what she said.
Seconds faster, so we got a little bit of an improvement there. And now let's get into testing 3D Mark's Steel Nomad Lite, basically a gaming benchmark. We got the score 39.4 FPS compared to 31. That's about 27%.
So this is important. I've seen some people comment on that. Why is Steel Nomad Lite not getting some of the benefits that we are seeing actually in real world games? And that is unfortunately something that I've been trying to tell you people over and over again. Even though 3D Mark's tests have gotten better over time a little bit, right? We have 3D Mark Steel Nomad and Steel Nomad Lite. We got Solar Bay, but then we got the much better, actually RT intensive Solar Bay Extreme. So there are some improvements happening. I'm not denying that. But at their core, a lot of these 3D Mark tests, they very quickly max out depending on your core count, and then they just keep scaling a little bit with memory bandwidth, right? Which, sure, that's fine. That shows a lot of the scaling you will probably see on lower to mid-range, like mobile stuff games, maybe like AA games like Hollow Knight Silk. So a lot of the stuff that already has no problem running at like 120 FPS or something like that. It's just not going to show you how games scale that are really demanding. Your Cyberpunks, your Assassin's Creed Shadows, all that stuff, right? So when people like, plus again, don't forget, Steel Nomad Lite is specifically not designed to stress hardware too much, so it can be cross-compatible between all devices that have 8 gigs of RAM or more. Right? The desktop Steel Nomad is actually much more intense. So again, keep that in mind whenever you're using a 3D Mark. Like I've always tried to tell people, especially GFX Bench, that one is now completely outdated. The engines are crap. like none of that scales with newer caching features and stuff like that. It's basically higher clocks and higher bandwidth, which is great, but higher clocks and higher bandwidth are actually not the biggest upgrades we're getting these days. It's more about hardware accelerated features, and it's deep architectural optimizations for more demanding stuff. Even like on the PlayStation 5, for example, like a thing they tuned from base RDNA 1 and 2 was actually the geometry engine. It's basically how much detail you can put on screen, even when you're accounting for the same kind of resolution. And it's these kinds of optimizations that get completely ignored by these kinds of tests. Don't forget, 3D Mark uses their own custom engine, an engine that, by the way, is specifically designed for DX12 in mind. So it's the way it works on Android and iOS, sure, it's optimized for OpenGL, Vulkan, and Metal, or at least it's compatible with those, but it's not really built in mind with those. Yeah, but that's just a completely different rant. She's a troublemaker. Yeah, she said that, yeah.
Higher average FPS. And now let's test ray tracing with gaming. This is Solar Bay Extremist.
Again, this is testing ray tracing with not a real game, but a benchmark.
Latest benchmark that they just released in unlimited mode, because we do have some changes on the GPU.
So this is something that I don't like for like raw performance testing. The unlimited mode does have its downsides because it obviously like accumulates data and heat and shit like that. So I would prefer to always let the test run once in a completely isolated environment, no background tasks, nothing else on the system, nothing else in memory. And then I would still clean up the RAM and everything, and then I would run the unlimited mode. The new GPU is happening, saying Riley, absolutely. The fact that this is happening is a big jump, even while still on a 3nm family of nodes. It makes me wonder if in their transition to 2nm and GAAFET and all those changes, if Apple is just going to port this exact same GPU architecture, but maybe benefit from more cache because of higher density or better clock speeds, better efficiency from 2nm, or because the transistor leap is so large, maybe Apple will have another big GPU architectural leap. I don't know. But then again, Apple still has some other things to improve. I wouldn't be surprised if the neural engine got a big update next year. We actually surprisingly still got some changes to the media engines this year, which a lot of people didn't expect. I definitely didn't expect further improvements to H.264. I basically only expected ever from this day on to improve H.265, ProRes, later on AV1, but seemingly they're not fully ignoring older standards, which is quite cool. Kevchat is saying also do test with and without charge. True, just to make sure that you also have like we usually know that the Macs are capable of providing this max power with or without charge, but yeah, especially on higher end devices at that point, the M Pro chips, the M Max chips, at that point, especially since you do have a high power mode in settings, then it really starts to matter in my opinion. I agree.
Architecture on the M5, Max Weinbach did say in his new review that we have a 3rd generation ray tracing accelerator, we have a new shader core, and of course new neural accelerator.
And we have a new generation of dynamic caching too.
Which work similar to NVIDIA's Tensor cores. So let's go ahead and start this test. And there you go, that is what I was waiting for. Holy smokes, 32 FPS compared to 21.5. That's basically 50% faster for this ray tracing test. That means we're gonna get huge ray tracing gains for all different kinds of performance workloads that you do with graphics and ray tracing. That is insane. And now let's get into Blender. This is the app that a lot of 3D rendering artists use.
It's 1.488.
And I'm really excited to see how big of an improvement we get. Of course, we have ray tracing, acceleration, everything enabled, cycles, GPU. Let's go ahead and render image. No way, guys. It's even faster. It took 55 seconds to render this image on the M5. 1 minute and 48.5. That means it is almost exactly 2 times faster.
It's actually over 2 times faster. If you do that in in seconds, that's 55 seconds. This is wait, okay, no. Oh, wait, the test he showed on Twitter was 140, not 148. Now I'm a little bit confused, but yeah, it's basically almost exactly. Copyrights, this is what I'm doing here is free use. I'm reacting to their content. I am providing my own 2 cents. I am pausing a lot. That's called free use. I do that here with Max Tech content. I do that with MKBHD content. I do that with a lot of other YouTube reviewers and stuff like that. Beyond 1 or 2, I never had any copyright issues, and even then, none of my videos ever got flagged for it. Individual videos might have been demonetized, but sometimes it came more down to some of the music, unironically, that was used in those videos. So I'm not sure if that gave them issues or if they licensed that music for themselves, or YouTube might have been just confused, to be honest. But yeah, everything I'm doing here is free use. I will absolutely stand by that. And for most of my content, it has never given me any issues, Tigest. Kev Chatter, do you think M5 MacBook Pro M5 will have Wi-Fi 7 or anything more than M5? The problem is I don't know why Apple is even keeping Wi-Fi 6E here. Like my only speculation that I can have is the way the MacBook Pro motherboard is designed. It's not easy to slot in the N1 in here. But I would hope, my hope is that Apple goes crazy and doesn't just give us N1 on the M5 Pro and Max MacBook Pro, but even goes beyond that and gives us something like the N1X, right? That would still give you Wi-Fi 7, Bluetooth 6, integrated thread support, but maybe with its Wi-Fi 7, it actually gives you 320 megahertz bandwidth, so potentially up to double the speeds of what the current N1 does.
Then the M4, generation over generation, that is insane. I'm actually looking up the score of the more expensive M4 Pro, and this thing is almost as fast with only 10 GB.
Yeah, so this is why I was a little bit confused, because previously here he had 140 and now it's 149. This is why you usually run these tests not once, but like when you look at hardware reviewers like Hardware Unboxed, Gamers Nexus, you'll usually find these that's where I got 49 seconds. Oh, he probably posted the wrong image on Twitter when saying it's almost twice as fast, because and then he posted the M5. He posted about the M5, but he posted this image with the M4 Pro. Okay, that makes sense.
U-Cores, this is nuts. By the way, guys, make sure to subscribe because we're gonna be comparing the M5 to the M4 Pro and seeing how big of a difference there is. And now with some of those graphics tests out of the way, let's get into Xcode, where we have our Xcode benchmark to see
I'm gonna speed this up a little bit.
Because some people said it's
Wait,
quite
I downloaded
a lot
this video.
better.
Why is it playing at 1440p?
Before I get into Xcode,
hey, as long as it doesn't
show
impact
you
my
guys
internet.
Our sponsor, TomTalk. This is their laptop sleeve that I've actually been enjoying since last year. You have a zipper on the top, just like this. This thing is amazing. Back into Xcode, we have our results. We have 148 seconds for the M5, 177 for the M4, almost 30 seconds faster on the M5, so nice improvement there.
Yeah, this completely scales with the CPU. There are no like big changes here that would benefit from the GPU stuff or something like that.
Now for you music producers out there, this is Logic Pro. This is the Logic Pro benchmark, which essentially puts a stress load of running a bunch of instruments or tracks at the same time. So let's go ahead and run it here. So you can see they're both playing it just fine. And you can see they're both playing 140 tracks just fine. All right, let's bump up the M5 up to 200 tracks. Okay, that is too much. It has already reloaded. 140, by the way, is how much we got on the M4 last time we tested. All right, 170 tracks. Still too much on the M5, okay. Let's try.
Yeah, now we are becoming pretty much like memory limited, and memory has gotten faster. You got more bandwidth, got a little bit more cache on the CPU, but you are really not, like, as long as you're not giving it actual extra memory and actual extra cores, there's only so much that could happen. My speculation is, I have not seen this video in full, is that we max out at what, 160, 155?
160? There you go. I just tested a bunch of times, ended up with 159 tracks on the new M5 versus 140 on the M4. That is not that big of a difference, only 19 tracks more.
Yeah, but again, this is not how, like, this is not actual speed in how you use the app usually. Plus, again, 159 tracks is usually far above any regular music project that anybody would run on a base MacBook Pro. If you're working with like a full orchestral setup and shit like that, you're probably making it run on a device with 64 gigs of RAM or something like that. Especially if you can benefit here from unified memory. That's crazy.
That's because we still have only 4 performance cores, the same.
Yeah, a little bit, but I mean, more cores come with more cache and stuff like that, which allows you to have more things running. But I would argue the primary difference here is actually the amount of memory.
Same as the M4, and that is what matters for stress tests like this. And now let's do a first, something we've never done before. We're gonna test AI performance. This is Draw Things running offline.
This is actually an app that Apple recommended, not testing, but that Apple tested for their own stuff when introducing, I believe they tested it out on the iPad Pro too. So this is apparently an app that's available on Mac and iPad. Kev Chat is saying, side note, do you prefer AirPods Pro 3 or 2? I heard 2 audio feels more natural. That's bullshit. Like, I do have my AirPods Pro 3. I think the only thing I dislike about AirPods Pro 3 is that the case feels cheaper. And it takes a tiny bit longer to get used to how they feel. Like, I know some people will say, oh, the silicon versus like the... foam versus the foam at the core, you cannot really feel it. You can feel it a little bit if you have sensitive skin. I have sensitive skin everywhere, so I assume in my ears too. But no, the sound to me, just from the difference in active noise cancellation, just from the improvements in transparency mode, which already felt kind of perfect on AirPods Pro 2, no, AirPods Pro 3 are just better. Yes, they have a slightly different sound profile that maybe slightly more emphasizes bass, but especially in the exact mid section where you will find a lot of podcasts, a lot of basic sounds and stuff like that from your regular pop shit like that, you won't feel a difference, except for that this sound is more volumetric, it is more clear in a way. But you're like, I wish Apple would allow people who get really nitpicky about this stuff to customize that with like what a lot of headphones brands do. They do have dynamic EQ, which is obviously not the same as manually customizing it fully to your own preference. That being said, I'm completely happy with my AirPods Pro 3. Yeah, the case is cheaper and it has half the battery inside. So while the battery inside the actual AirPods is better, the case actually has pretty crappy battery life. So that's my only complaint. I would have easily paid 20 euros more for the exact case as before, just USB-C, because I came from the Lightning one. Unfortunately, the fact, like they previously had 2 batteries inside AirPods Pro 2 case, 2 very small ones on each side, and now they basically removed one half, which results in the case, even though it's physically larger, to be lighter, and that makes it feel much more plasticky, much more cheap, much more less dense. So that's my only gripe with AirPods Pro 3. It has absolutely nothing to do with their sound.
On both, we downloaded the Pixel Wave Flux 0.1 Schnell 04 on both of them. We're gonna see how much faster we can do text to image generation. So I added in a prompt right here. So describing a girl. Let's see what we get. I've left everything default. The only thing I changed is I turned down the steps down to 5 steps on each. So let's go ahead and generate. And dang, there you go. We are done. Wow, that is very fast on the M5. We ended up with very similar images left and right, and it took only 53 seconds on the M5. We had 5 steps for this image generation compared to 2 minutes and 9 seconds on the M4, making the M5 chip over twice as fast for this text-to-image generation. That is a crazy speed up. Now, I do want to show you guys a couple of other charts from Max Weinbach's
Actually
review
getting
of
close to almost 2.5 times when you think about it.
the M5. He tested the M4 versus the M5 without using the new neural accelerators with the new MLX. He saw a 31% performance boost on the M5, with the decode prefill being 108.7 tokens per second compared to 75 on the M4. But when he enabled the brand new neural accelerators, he saw a 3.65.
So this is exactly kind of the 3.5 to 4x difference that Apple advertised with the neural accelerators on the A19 series, now on the M5 series. People apparently say that it's specifically an improvement to like prefill, basically to like your first run. And then overall compute might be close to 2x or something like that. And then in specific tasks where maybe you share it actually across the A&E and the CPU, you just utilize the full SoC. There, the actual improvement is small because the A&E has gotten like 5 to 10% better. The CPU neural accelerators are not that changed as the GPU, which got neural accelerators in the first place. Features like SME, SVE, those are all stuff that was introduced last year. So maybe overall neural compute on the base M5 is kind of like 50% better. But then it would actually mean much more benefit for M Pro and M Max, where disproportionate power of AI compute comes from the GPU, right? Because don't forget, all of them have the same neural engine, which means on the iPhone, the biggest part of your compute is made up by far by the neural engine. Then the base M chips get kind of close with the overall AI compute of their GPU versus their neural engine. Then the M Pros start to outpace their neural engine with the AI compute with the GPU. Now that's specifically when we are talking about what I expect the M5 generation to do. And once we get to the M Max and M Ultra chips, now, technically, you could combine several neural engines into one, which Apple tries to do, but the scaling doesn't seem to work that well. In this case, the GPU is by far your biggest bottleneck for AI compute. So this is why we're going to see, in some ways, even larger gains on M5 Pro, M5 Max. CapChat saying, I would buy AirPods Pro 3 for the health features, but I don't have iPhone. Yeah, but it still works, right, with other apps as far as I know. But yeah, AirPods work best in the Apple ecosystem, unfortunately.
Times speed up, which was very, very impressive. So these new neural accelerators are doing insane work for local AI. And now let's move on to our stress testing. We have Cinebench 2024. This is where we're going to use this FLIR thermal camera. But first, I wanted to test the single core. We got 199 points on.
Had some tests that show it over 200, but yeah, it's 200 to maybe 205 at most. Maybe 202 is like a good reference here.
The M5 compared to 172 on the M4, that's 16% faster. That's a pretty good difference for real world CPU rendering.
Again, I hate this obsession with calling Cinebench real world. Geekbench is actually built to mimic real world tests. Cinebench is much more about raw power. But okay.
It actually hit 200, quite insane. But now let me get into the 10-minute stress test for multi-core. Alrighty.
So this is where we're gonna see some of the things that I don't fully agree with.
And I have MX Power Gadget open right here so we can monitor the test.
So you see the power consumption difference. Now it should be noted that this app, as far as I know, has not yet been fully updated for M5, but I don't see why it would be getting it this wrong potentially. Plus, again, we are looking at peaks. Early on, overall power consumption would be closer to M4 than this difference.
And the clock speeds, looks like we're already running at 4.25 on the P cores. That looks to be the maximum you can run when you're running all of the P cores and cores at the same time, so 4.25.
Yeah, so you can see that we maintain roughly a 200 megahertz difference, which actually means that you potentially lose a little bit more percentage-wise here. But then again, we're looking also at 240 megahertz to be exact. So yeah, the scaling makes sense. It does consume definitely more power. I'm not denying that. We'll deal with what that means, because look at some of these things, like Core Max 115 versus 102, and that's with all these higher clock speeds. So that's a little bit questionable to me. But then core minimum at 102, are you telling me it never got core minimum at here? So don't forget, one core will actually have a lot more temperature sensors than one, because you never want to rely on one or something like that. So yeah, it really depends. I'm also a little bit confused. GPU average 75. Why is there any GPU stuff happening if they're only running the CPU test here? Yeah, core utilization, that makes sense. 99.5, 99.8. So interesting. We'll see the exact power consumption. We'll see some of the exact thermal numbers that come out of this.
3.94 looks to be the max on the M4. We're already going down. Look at that. We're throttling down a little bit. That's actually insane. We're already over 100 degrees Celsius on both of them. Looks like the new E-cores run at 2.96 compared to 2.8. So
they're clocked higher than on the iPhone too?
Running at higher power on the M5. I think it was over 30 watts peak compared to just 25 on the M4, so a little bit more power.
Yeah, you can see, I think this shows it rather well, this last one actually. You saw core max and core minimum is 99 degrees here for both. So my speculation is that before this gets updated, this power metric stuff, it is not capable of differentiating the different temperature sensors on the M5. So this could either mean showing much higher core minimums or much lower core max, right? So keep that in mind.
It's 25 on the M4, so a little bit more power. As far as the temps, the M5 is already cooled down to 98 degrees Celsius, while we have 103 on the M4,
and we still maintain a higher a higher clock speed on the M5. So very clearly you can see that whatever was happening with peak power draw, now there's also a difference here, obviously, with how the device gets cooled. We'll get to that a little bit later on. Don't forget, N3P is denser than N3E. It will give you more heat trapping because the transistors are just so small. So even without much higher power consumption, which seemingly we do have higher power consumption here, it would still get hotter on the chip, right? Again, there are obviously different factors to this. Just denser node means hotter. Obviously, changes to the core layout and the cache and however the communication happens. There's also just the overall, don't forget, PKG. I believe this is for package power. So here we're also accounting for much more power-hungry memory. That's one thing that we have seen definitely on the A19 Pro MacBook, on the A19 Pro iPhone Pro, where if you don't properly differentiate between the chip and the memory power consumption, you will actually get, even like on the iPhone, a full wattage difference. And on the MacBook, maybe it could be up to a 2-watt difference or something like that.
It does seem to be sort of throttling the performance a bit, but wait a second, look at that. The M5 went down to 4.0 P cores.
And you can see actually that difference is now more beneficial to the M5. If we follow the logic of how much this one has dropped its clock speeds while still being at 103 degrees Celsius, this one should now be at at like 3.9 if we follow even the base result. But if we actually just think about the 200 megahertz difference between 4.4 and 4.6, now that's the peak single core clock speed. Obviously the difference for multi-core is different. Plus, again, you can also see the difference in core max and core min. So you can actually see that this one is far better. Again, this could also still be issues with how this app is seeing the M5 because it's not been updated for it. But you can see that this one is, if it's hotter, if the fan is running louder, that's because it just chooses to target higher clock speeds even for longer periods of time. You can see here, this one held its top clock speed for longer than the MacBook Pro, at least on the P cores. On the E cores, you can actually see it's roughly identical. But then here, it started going down. And here, it started going down, then it went actually up a little bit. So I would argue there's a pretty good chance here that you also see the average temperature here is actually lower, again, with the higher clock speeds. So I would just argue that, no, this is not a thermal disaster. I've seen some people say, oh, but I've heard ARM chips don't run hot, right? Basically trying to downplay the achievements in efficiency that Apple has had with Apple Silicon. Yeah, this is just a differently tuned chip. Apple could have easily kind of ignored 100, even 150 megahertz for the sustained power. You would basically be a blip to down here and then maintain it right here, right? Well, this one actually keeps going down and down. This one actually doesn't look too stable. Yeah, so just trying to make you understand. Also, utilization here has gone down, which is interesting. So I'm not sure if there are any potential issues here happening with Cinebench. Just throwing things out there to make you understand this is not a device that will suddenly run that much hotter and at that much lower battery life than the M4.
Slowly started trickling back up to, what is that, 4.17, whereas the M4
yeah, this is a 20% difference in clock speeds now, right? Like, I'm not crazy, right? 4.22 divided by 3.47. Yeah, that's a 21.6% difference in clock speeds. That's way more than you would expect from just the uplift associated with N3P, I would argue. So, yeah, I don't think that the M5 is actually in any way less efficient than the M4. If anything, it's actually surprisingly more efficient because N3P by itself should not be giving us these kinds of advantages.
4 down to about 3.4, slowly going down. It's not recovering whatsoever. That's quite interesting. All right, now it did recover on the M4 a little bit higher, but definitely nowhere as high as the M5. I mean, it's running at 4.18 right now, much faster. Now, the M5 is running the fan quite a lot faster, 5,800 RPM.
Yeah, so this is different tuning, and this is why I recommend going with why is PKHD power higher than CPU power? Well, first of all, hi Sam. Shouldn't package power be higher? Yeah. Wait, did you see somewhere where CPU power is higher? Yeah, this is a bug. So this is one, and this is just wrong for both of them then, because yeah, package power includes the memory. Oh, thank you so much. I don't know how I've missed that. I guess my brain kind of auto-corrected. You are absolutely correct, Sam. Or whatever your real name is. But yeah, this makes no sense. The package power, especially here, should be higher. But also, even here, I would argue that the difference between 19.27 watts and 19 watts is too small, even if it were the correct way around, right? If this was the CPU power and this was the package power, it wouldn't make sense. I mean, it says DRAM is not available. Okay. But then again, what exactly are you measuring for package power other than DRAM and motherboard stuff, right? I mean, you could, in theory, go all out with overall motherboard stuff with like the Wi-Fi modem and the storage. But usually package power means it's the CPU And it's kind of how it sits on the motherboard. So that can mean, for example, with memory, because this is a packaged memory. This is very much part of the SoC for Apple. And it just means like the bandwidth that's kind of fed from the from the overall motherboard. It's how the VRMs are managed on the motherboards and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't think MX Power Gadget has been updated for the M5. Yeah, but even then, it has also this issue on the M4. So my question is this just a not so good application for this? Yeah, I would also like to know, because he does have TG Fan Pro here, right, running simultaneously. What core temperature, right, is aligning with the numbers here, right? Exactly, because we have a core max 116, a core min 94, a core average of 101, which would line up with these numbers, with the highest one being 103. So yeah, it's a little bit of a clusterfuck, unfortunately. Yeah, but this is kind of the problem whenever it's not exactly automated. It's not like they're making this run on an AI or something like that. But this is the problem when you get so used to one tool that you don't consider an alternative. And I've seen that myself, because when Apple Silicon just came out, or at least the one that I got, the M1 Max, I saw a lot of very contradictory numbers about like overall SoC power when using CPU and GPU simultaneously. Much like the complete peak of power and the actual sustained power. And that's something that I always bring up. Like I always um, bring up, for example, the RTX 5090 and 4090, right? Like they're rated up to like 450 watts, but you will have peaks, which I call like transient peaks, right? And they reach up to 650 watts. But these numbers have absolutely nothing to do with the power consumption you will have in actual games and things like that, right? So the only thing I'm really trying to say here is that these are actually very complicated to measure things, and I just recommend people really make sure that what they're analyzing, first of all, works correct, which this one seemingly is internally contradictory, which should really make your eyebrows come up, right? And is it even updated for the newest version, which could give you bad data? And even then, you should still compare it to something else, which, yes, he's using here TG Fan Pro, which, by the way, just this week got an update for macOS Tahoe. So I'm not sure if he's actually using the latest version here. Which is interesting. By the way, he clearly is not using this MacBook Pro a lot. Charge cycle count 7, charge cycle count 2. So at least we can know that the battery is not used up here or something like that. Guys, let me quickly do something. Tigist, you can have 1 minute timeout, because your messages are becoming a little bit much.
Compared to 4200, so it's kicking in that fan sooner.
By the way, one thing I hate about YouTube is when you're putting someone in timeout, it just deletes all their messages. That is not what I want. Like, I can put somebody in timeout just because they type in too much, or just because they typed in one bad thing. If I time out somebody for 1 minute, it's very unlikely that I want to delete all your messages. But hey, YouTube, why get better if you don't have any competition? Somehow, in the issue with all these power measurements on Apple devices, we have no good data to compare these apps to establish which is accurate. Yeah, I think the most realistic thing to kind of run here would be to actually just put it at 100%, which we would know is 72 watt hours, We minimize power consumption by the screen and stuff like that as much as we can. Hell, we can even use an M5 MacBook Pro and later an M5 Pro MacBook Pro. If they have the same screen, then that would normalize power consumption between the tests. And then we should kind of just use tests to run down the battery, and that would probably show us the exact power consumption.
So yes, you can hear more fan noise, definitely, on the M5. It's trying to keep those temps cool.
But again, it's not just trying, right? It is succeeding. It's running it cooler right now than the M4 while running at higher clock speeds.
So thankfully, they are allowing more power right out of the box, but you have to sacrifice just a little bit in terms of...
And yeah, what I was saying is I actually do recommend basically everyone who's like a tech enthusiast to get TG Fan Pro. I think it's a great app for those Macs. So goodbye, Tigist, for 24 hours. We're going to see if you improve your slightly obnoxious messaging style in the future.
Those fan speeds and fan noise. Now it's been about 8 minutes. Let's bust out the thermal camera. By the way, I'm impressed by the M5 because it's sticking at about 100 degrees or less throughout most of this test, while the M4 has been at...
Yeah, and basically what I think Apple realized with apps like Cinebench and just prolonged testing like this is it doesn't really make sense to not ramp up the fans for these extreme, like, full power tests, because it makes more sense, and I've now said making sense 20 times, to run through those tests quicker, like especially in an export test or a rendering test. You're probably not even using your Mac that much, so what instead you would do is like you're running through your app, right? Your Final Cuts, your Xcodes, your Logic Pros, your Cinema 4Ds, right? And then you're clicking on export, or your Blenders, right? And then you're clicking on export, which at that point it's utilizing your memory, your fastest storage, your new CPU and GPU architectures and stuff like that. And at that time, you might get out to get a coffee or go to the bathroom. So why not just ramp up the clock speeds and with them the fan speeds, just so you can get through it faster, and then you can get faster to using the Mac again. That's different from running a concurrent task, like actually editing in Final Cut Pro, actually typing in code in Xcode, or actually playing a game. And in those cases, we will see different ways to how Apple runs these chips. Riley saying unlikely, bro. Seems like yes, room temperature IQ. Who knows? It could be an AI at this point. It's so much stupid shit these days.
About 102, 103.
That's one downside of having a lot of viewers coming in from India later on. Like I've had amazing viewers from India and just people I interact with through Twitter and stuff like that. But because the market is so large, it just becomes disproportionately more likely for you to attract bots and attract AI bullshit and stuff like that.
So that's pretty cool. Now looking at the temps, I'm gonna measure the M4 right underneath the T. Looks like we're at right there, 40 degrees Celsius.
Guys, by the way, we've been watching this video for 14 minutes, and I'm now 1 hour and 50 minutes into the stream, which means we've been watching this video for like 1.5 hours, roughly 10 times its runtime currently. So yeah, if somebody is ever like wondering if what I'm doing is fair use and stuff like that, you can tell them that I literally prolong a video into 10x its runtime.
And then over to the M5, a little bit hotter. Look at that, 41.7. The M5 is actually hotter in terms of the chassis. Now, what about heat dissipation? I'm gonna measure this little spot where the fan blows out, 47.6 on the M4. And then on the M5, we have 48.6 right there. So this is doing a little bit of a better job getting rid of the heat, because I think the fan speed, actually no, they're the same, 6500 basically maxed out on both.
Yeah, you see, this is why I'm saying, like, when you look at the actual like long-term thing, right, here we are at 3.84 at 4 gigahertz, or is it 4 hours? No, it's 4 gigahertz, right? You see it just normalizes on its own over time. That's the benefit of a fully integrated solution. Now, would I like this MacBook Pro to have 20% more sustained power consumption? Yeah, but at the same time, don't forget, it has the same battery capacity of 72 watt hours. So in the end, that would then result in lower battery life. So, oh yeah, and seemingly that's a bug with those curves. Because it's not happening seemingly on the M4. Good to know.
So the M5 is definitely running hotter, but it's managing the chip temp very, very well, keeping it under 100. All right, we have our score, and I'm a little bit disappointed. 1,011 points on the M5. I thought it'd score a lot higher. We had 923 on the M4, and interestingly, the M4 actually had a better multiplier, 5.38 times more than the single core compared to on the M5, only 5.07. What does that mean? Well, that signals...
It means nothing. It just means Cinebench is not the greatest multi-core scaler if you don't actually give it more cores. We have seen that in tests that show far better scaling across the board than Cinebench. And no, I'm not talking Geekbench. I'm even talking about stuff like Spec and whatever. Even CPU-Z or CPU-X or whatever bullshit it's called on Windows, right? Some people made it run on like a Mac, and it ran 20% better than on the fastest Intel laptop or whatever. So, or I don't know if it even was a laptop, or even they compared it with a desktop chip or something like that. But yeah, it's really Cinebench. It is good, and don't get me wrong, Cinebench 2024 is so much better than Cinebench R23. But Cinebench 2024 is still the very first version of Cinebench that's properly optimized for ARM devices, right? It does not take into account their newer architectural features. It was never updated specifically for new generations of processors. Apple does not optimize their chips for Cinebench or CS2 like Intel and AMD optimize their chips. So yeah, it is what it is. This chip is 14 to 18% faster. And whenever it shows a much smaller gap, it's usually more of an issue with the specific benchmark.
Thermal throttling on the M.
No, that's not what we saw at all. I refuse. We saw more fan noise early on, but we actually saw lower temperatures in TG Fan Pro. So I'm not sure where we actually saw bigger drops in clock speeds on the P cores on the M4. We saw on the M5, we saw drops from let's even compare the single core clock speeds, right? We see a single core clock speed from 4.4 going down to like 3.58 on the M4, right? While we see from a 4.6 single core clock speed going down to like 4.2 on the MacBook Pro. Even if it was the exact same 600 megahertz lowering, it would percentage-wise actually still be in the benefit of M5.
Essentially,
but it's not. It drops less.
The clock speeds down. It's not letting it run at full speed. It's
but that's exactly what we saw with the M4. That makes no sense.
Temps down. Basically, that single fan is now holding the M5 chip back, and we saw it in the fluctuations of the performance clock speeds not being stuck at 4.25 the entire time.
Okay, 4.25. Well, wait, then the drop is even lower than I thought.
We're going down and up. Basically, this single fan is not good enough anymore.
Wait, but the M4 by that logic was already not good enough, because we saw higher clock speeds. At the end, we saw the same fan speeds and fan noise. And like, so I'm a little bit confused.
For the M5 chip, and we're getting thermal throttling confirmed. And finally, before I move on to photo editing in Lightroom Classic, let's just do a quick single GPU Cinebench run. All right, got the score. It's 35% faster on the M5 about.
Which is interesting because that to me is a little bit surprising, but also not. Because it shows the raw GPU compute increase that we saw on Geekbench 6 compute. But Cinebench, because it's based on Cinema 4D, actually should be much better at accelerating ray tracing, similar to Blender. But clearly, RT hardware acceleration is not baked into their GPU benchmark. So I wonder if actually running Cinema 4D, and especially running something like Blender, which we saw and we know is much faster than 35%, now we know that their GPU benchmark in Cinebench 2024 is definitely not up to like supporting hardware RT, at least not in metal, at least not on Apple Silicon. Riley, I'd wait a week or two for some quality reviews than listening to Max rage. Well, I don't actually think that this review is really rage bait. The reason why I'm reacting to this, I think it actually tests a lot of different stuff. But yeah, I will react to other tests. Once again, I did have a longer hiatus. I did have some work stuff, some family stuff to deal with. It's all good. It's all managed, but I was quite busy. I apologize for that. So, and I thought that for my first time being back, it actually makes sense to look at something that has a lot of different data at once and is pretty popular. So yeah, I think this makes sense.
5,870 points compared to 4,344. Even though this uses ray tracing, it doesn't seem to gain as much as we saw in, let's say, Blender or Solar Bay. Now here in Lightroom Classic, we have an export test with 50 42 megapixel raw photos. Let's go ahead and export on both of these. See which one's faster. All right, the test is finished.
So this is where we will see not much of a difference in my opinion. Again, I did not pre-watch this part. I only pre-watched basically the power consumption thing. Here we'll see a decent uplift from the faster SSD, but overall, this is not an app that really like scales that much with super high clock speeds at some point. We're like with photo editing, unless it's some kind of crazy shit, it's really not that difficult even for like M1 hardware, right? So the scaling will actually be limited by the internal logic of the app. People check gaming or sustainability or apps people actually use. True, I agree. But then again, it does make sense to at least get a reference point with artificial benchmarks before we get to real world tests. So this is me more using it as a reference for artificial stuff. Kev Chata, what MacBook do you have? Will you get M5 or M6? I have the M1 Max 14-inch MacBook Pro. That's the fully enabled one with 32 GPU cores and 32 gigs of memory and 1 terabytes of storage. I will probably not get any M5 device because I would like to get a big screen change before I update. So to me, it's either going to be something in the M6 Pro or Max family, or I might even wait until M7 or something like that. At that point, just to get the best possible value, because I might update my iPad sooner than that, because I just use my iPad a lot more throughout the day. But I have been using my Mac more because of certain work stuff, and it still does all the streaming that I need perfectly well. But once I get 3 times faster internet at home, I would like to start changing to like 1440p or even 4K streaming. And I also want to do more gaming while streaming. So yeah, over time an upgrade will just make sense.
Too bad it took 49 seconds on the M4 and 40 seconds on the...
You can see this is not a test. Like anything that takes under a minute, it just doesn't max out your chip, right? That much. So yeah, makes sense. Probably you're seeing some of the difference from single core performance. probably like half of the gain, and the other half of the gain is just faster exporting because of the faster storage.
M5, not a crazy wild difference, but still, we're getting an improvement here. We have faster memory bandwidth now with the new M5 chip, faster graphics for exporting, so nice. And now let's test video editing in Final Cut Pro 11.2. This is a 5-minute project testing HEVC footage. Essentially, we do a playback test, which back in the day, we used to get stuttering. Now all the new Macs are just perfectly smooth all the time. So let's go ahead and export this project and see if the actual exporting encoders got any faster with the M5. And look at that, we have confirmation the encoders are actually faster on the M5. That is very nice.
And this is also why I watch Max Tech. They will occasionally test stuff that other people will just forget. Similar to me, I actually wouldn't have thought of even comparing media encoders because Apple didn't advertise them. But hey, they've gotten faster.
From the M1 to the M2 to the M3, they were exactly the same speed. The M4 got a little bit faster, but not by that much. And there you go, the M4 is done. Look at that, 1:42 on the M5 compared to 2 minutes and 1 second, basically 2 minutes on the M4. We do now have another increase in the encoders. Great job, Apple. And now let's test something that is not limited by the encoders, but by the CPU and GPU. This is crazy 8K
Riley saying,
ProRes
I've been
raw,
working as a
5-minute
graphic
project.
designer
It's
for
gonna put out
years,
a
and Facebook
75
compression will
gig
make anyone
file.
cry.
This
Also
is
stream
going
to it for a local
insane.
organization. What hardware do you use
Here
for
we go.
that?
All right, this test is running, and we are basically maxing out the GPU on both of these right here, but I've switched TGFan Pro to measure the GPU temp. We're at 107 degrees Celsius, fully maxing it out, and it is getting...
Yeah, Kevchada, your use case also makes sense to me. Yeah. Thank you guys, by the way. As always, let me know, what actually do you use hardware for? And where do you see maybe reasons to upgrade later on? Like, I like watching YouTube and stuff like that, and YouTube doesn't really need something like Tandem OLED that much. On my iPad. I do like watching like beautiful movies, but I watch them on my LG 65-inch OLED TV, right? So Tandem OLED on my MacBook is more like a really, if I upgrade, I need it, but do I really need it just by itself? The answer is kind of no. Riley saying you're using an Intel 9th gen Windows laptop because you can't find a good MacBook app for what you're doing. Yeah, makes sense.
hot.
But even then, 9th gen, I assume you're using it though with a dedicated GPU, right? Because just using the CPU power of a 9th gen processor is not gonna be great these days.
M4, we have for both clusters 99 degrees Celsius, not as hot as the M5, but I am seeing this go faster in terms of the progress. Opening up MX Power Gadget, we're using about 19 watts on the GPU by itself on the M5, compared to about 13.7.
So this is actually weird to me because this to me, and this goes back to what Sam actually pointed out. So the package power here actually does make some sense, but not enough, because you see the GPU uses 14 watts, the CPU uses 2.3 watts, the DRAM probably uses around 1 to 2 watts. The math doesn't fully make sense, but at least the package power is higher than the GPU and CPU power individually.
On the M5.
Similar things here, 19 plus 3.86. Again, it's still, you even see it doesn't even mention memory, it just basically says not available, I think, or A&E. Wait, it was trying to ascertain the power of the neural engine here, but not the package power portion of the memory. Okay, this is weird. But even here, the math doesn't quite math out, because it would come in at roughly it would actually come in at 22.97 watts. So even here it would be higher. Again, it should be even higher than that once you account for the memory, which is very much part of the package. If it's not counting that, it's simply doing the package power wrong. So this app clearly has some issues.
Compared to about 13.
But also 14 watts power consumption for the GPU on the M4, to me, suggests that it's not that well optimized here or something like that, because usually even games will put this at up to 18 watts.
0.7, 14 on the M4. So we're using a lot more power on that M5 GPU. No wonder it is getting so hot. Now checking in on the fan speed, this thing's running at 6,000 RPM, so a lot faster than the M4 running at only 3,800. So it's pretty clear that a single fan is throttling. Not
I
only
assume
the
that's
CPU
not for
when you
me.
run it at
I
full,
just carry
but
my
the
stuff
graphics as
in
well.
the
Apple, you need to give
in the
this
12 South book cases.
machine 2 fans now. All right, the test is finished. The M5 finished in 4 minutes and 18 seconds, and the M4 finished in 5 minutes and 34 seconds, about 34% faster.
You can also see some difference here that would come down to storage, but probably not too much. So yeah, it makes sense.
On the M5, pretty much what we saw in Geekbench and some of those other tests, which is honestly a great improvement gen over gen. Keep in mind, this is on the same N3P node from TSMC.
So it's not the same N3P node. This is an N3E node on the M4, and this is N3P. So you get roughly 5% more just from the node alone.
So Apple is putting in work. Great job on this performance. And the last thing we got to test is the battery life difference after all of this crazy heavy duty testing. Moment of truth, our battery life after a couple hours of heavy duty testing, 29% on the M4. And then on the M5, we have 32%. So it looks like the M5 MacBook Pro has better battery life while under load for all these tests and using more power all the time. Basically every test it used more power and it still had better battery life. That's probably because it's finishing the tests faster, so it gets to sit to idle sooner. So wow, more performance, more battery life. Bravo. And now,
so that is one thing that always irks me about Geekervan tests, because they love to make similarly contradictory statements, but at least he kind of found a reason, like, oh, it might have higher peak power consumption, but it also helps it finish certain tasks faster. So in the end, I would argue that thankfully, he didn't actually put anything even about thermal throttling or getting hot in the title. So while usually I will criticize MaxTech here, this is Vadim, for being a little bit clickbaity, I actually think that for a YouTube video that still needs to find its audience, this is 92K views in 2 days, I actually think the balance here is quite okay. Now, I would like to see more real-world tests. We have games these days like Baldur's Gate 3, Cyberpunk 2077, Assassin's Creed Shadows. We do have, obviously, stuff like Blender, where it might actually use like 5 to 6, 7 minutes of render time, not just 1 to 2 minutes. At that point, you could also test like just how long, just how it sustains power and stuff like that. You can run the Adobe Premiere benchmarks and things like that. But again, we're still early on. I still expect to see these kinds of tests. But without further ado, let's actually move on. Kev Chat is saying, somewhere I heard there's more throttling on M5 MacBook Pro than M4. Well, you heard it here in his video, even though in the end it still came out that the MacBook Pro was still faster in finishing those tests and actually maintained more battery life because it finished those tests faster. I would argue the main difference here is that it sustains peak clock speeds closer to peak clock speeds in multi-core tests, and because of that it has to ramp up its fans more than the M4, at least early on in the testing. But actually more thermal throttling, my answer would be no, or very, very insignificantly so. Plus, again, I do want to tell you, do not focus on single fan versus dual fan. Usually, if you do dual fans, you don't just increase heat dissipation with the fans, you also have heat sinks that are connected to the fans. So technically, you could have one fan still, but one larger fan, one fan with better heat sinks, or even a fan that's connected to the chip, not just through like a heat pipe, but also with a vapor chamber. So there's a lot that could be done that's not quite adding a full second fan. The reason why Vadim, the MaxTech guys, are talking so much about the second fan is because we have a reference device for a second fan. In this case, the M Pro and M Max based MacBook Pro. But speaking of devices with fans, let's actually move to devices with no fans. And now we're actually looking at Max from MaxTech, not Vadim. And let's see if we are going to see some of the same issues that we supposedly saw on the Mac, also on the iPad. And you know what? I'm actually going to speed up my video to 1.3 at this point, because we don't need that much time now that we already have a lot of reference data. And I think that I will actually react to Apple Vision Pro maybe tomorrow at that point, because this video is getting long. We've been streaming now for over 2 hours. My voice is getting a little bit hoarse. I still have to do some cleaning at home. So yeah.
M5 iPad Pro, that much better than the M4? Well, today we're gonna go in depth and compare the performance and the new features with this new Pro iPad. Now, last year with the M4, Apple had a huge redesign. We had the super thin design, better display.
Again, it's not a huge redesign, but it was a thinner device with a brand new screen.
We got the new keyboard case. It was a massive upgrade, and you could still buy an M4 for $100 less than this new M5 model.
I would argue if the only price difference is $100, you should get the M5. Just for the 12 gigs of RAM alone, that's going to make it much more future-proof and 2 times faster storage. Don't forget M series iPads minus the M1 64 gigabyte iPad Air. They can use their storage as like a help for the memory, right? For overflow, basically. That's something iPhones don't do. Because it would consume more power. It would be a big difference in speed, what runs on memory and what runs on storage. So yeah, here, $100 difference, absolutely buy M5. $200 difference, now it's much more in favor of the M4.
But this M5 is supposed to have insane performance. Now, as far as the design, the only thing that changed on the outside is the fact that we no longer have an iPad Pro logo or text down here, and none of that tiny little font either. It's a super clean look, and the silver looks quite nice.
I'm not sure if that will be the case in Europe.
In the box, we do still have a power adapter, but this is...
Yeah, this is unfortunate now, because I wish Apple would remove the power adapter and reduce the cost of the device maybe by $50, and that it was then money that somebody could just invest in a 40-watt break. I've actually seen some tests, I believe by Dave 2D, and the iPad Pro maxed out at 51 watts in his charging. So yeah, you'll definitely don't even buy Apple's 40 to 60 watt power adapter. Just buy a regular gallium nitride 60 watt adapter from Anker or Aukey. I don't always have had the best experience with those companies, but they're still way cheaper, and you can actually get a lot of dual port chargers from them. So unless Apple starts making this, but dual port, it's really hard for me to recommend. And I don't mean this, the 20 watt charger, I mean the 40 watt to 60 watt charger.
Only a 20 watt. If you want to get the new fast charging...
Yeah, Kevchada, I fully understand. You would rather get a nice OLED TV than an iPad M5. Yeah, that depends on the cycle you're in, right? Like my OLED is still relatively new, so I don't see a reason to upgrade it, but then my MacBook and my iPad are slowly getting a bit older, now being my iPad a little over 4 years old, my MacBook being exactly 4 years old. I still think both of them will probably suit me well for the next 1.5 to 2 years, maybe one even for another 3 years or something like that. But yeah, and then I would consider maybe getting a new TV once I actually move to a different place. But yeah, I fully understand that.
that finally comes with the new M5 iPad Pro, you have to get one that is 40 watts or higher, like the new one that came out with the iPhones. Then you could charge this new iPad to 50% in 30 minutes, which is sweet. And now I have the new one set up. Everything's identical, the screen's identical, but the first test that I wanna do is the SSDs. Even though we have the same capacity, we should have improved speed.
And this is what I see happening probably on the MacBook Air. Now, it's very likely that the 1 terabyte iPad Pro, and I assume the 512 gigabyte version, they would match this storage speed on the base M5 MacBook Pro. That's what has been happening with iPads in previous years. In fact, when you look at higher storage configurations of the iPad Pro in the past, you will find that they already reached those kinds of 3 MBS speeds. So yeah, this to me suggests doubling the speed across all storage tiers, but not to one universal speed, just relative. So this is double, and then it's going to double also respectively based on what kind of storage tier you're on.
And wow, okay.
The only thing I would really like to know if already 512 gigabytes, similar to what we saw on the MacBook Pro, is already double this speed, or if Apple did some weird stuff and it would force you to go up to 1 terabyte to get the full 6,000 to 7,000.
I don't know if I've seen a tablet this fast.
Well, you saw that on the previous 1 terabyte versions.
As far as the read speeds, we're looking at 1656 compared to 3413. That is more than twice as fast for read, and that's very important. As far as write, 1490.
So latency is also reduced, so that's nice. Whatever Apple is doing with their memory controllers, that's definitely happening. And you can also see random speeds. Now, they have not doubled because that's just extremely difficult to do. But IOPS and in MBS speeds, we are still seeing some nice improvements of roughly what? 26-ish%, 30-ish%. So yeah, some good continuation. Max read and writes will change more because they are less depending on the amount of actual cache and stuff like that on the SSD. They're less dependent on the memory controller. They're just depending on the PCIe lanes that they connected to. So yeah, a good update.
Compared to 2,876, so about twice as fast as well. That is really cool. And now getting into Geekbench 6, the first thing that you'll notice is that we have more RAM. At the base, we now have 12 gigs compared to 8, and
so
that is really nice if you do real productivity or multitasking. Now that the base, we now have 12.
So we see that the clock speed here is like imperceptibly faster, like 20 megahertz. I actually might skip around a little bit. You see that it gets up to around 4150, so it doesn't quite reach the 4300. Again, makes sense given that the MacBook Pro is clocked roughly 4% higher. That just all makes sense. In terms of multi-core results, this is the GPU. This is the GPU. Where do we have CPU multi-core? There it is. Don't forget, this is the 9-core M5, so not only is it clocked a little bit lower than the M5 on the MacBook Pro, but it also has 1 fewer P-cores, so that also explains the difference why the 10-core MacBook Pro can reach up to like 18,000 points here. But you also get the M5 iPad Pro in a 10-core version if you buy the 1 terabyte configuration or higher. So keep that in mind, though I would argue you probably won't feel the difference between this and the theoretical like 17,000 points either. That's just not how iOS works.
And in single core, we 3,440 single core score at graphics. Oh. And look at this, guys. We're at 73,446 compared to 55,000. It's about a 35% improvement.
So again, the same scaling as we saw from A18 Pro to A19 Pro, as we saw on the M5 MacBook Pro to the M4 MacBook Pro, faster memory, more system level cache, all those advantages, new shader architecture.
Do we have more GPU performance?
Let's see the AI performance specifically for the
engines have been remade. I mean, it's a big difference in terms of graphics. And guys, look at this. For single core, we're already about 26% higher single precision score. But if you look at the half precision score or the quantized, That is more than double.
Yeah.
That's about 2.
So this is some of the differences that we saw in apps like Draw Things. We even see some things like pre-fill rate for tokens, potentially up to 4 times faster. So again, it will depend on the exact nature of your AI test.
Off screen, and we're also going to test out some of the ray tracing, which is going to be crazy. Now, while this is running, I want to mention that tests with the M4 iPad Pro, for example, in Destiny Rising, that was already capped at 90 FPS, playing full performance. It's one of the best graphics available for mobile, and the M4 iPad...
No, it's definitely one of the better graphics for a multiplayer mobile game, but you do have stuff like Resident Evil and stuff like that, Assassin's Creed Mirage on iPad. So no, it's not the peak of
was not
graphics.
Even getting hot. So even the M4 has killer graphics. And unfortunately, I was not expecting this here. We have 27.4 compared to 25.4. That's less than a 10% difference. And if we look at the chart here, it started out quite a bit higher, but towards the end...
Yeah, but like overall frame rate, overall score, what's the peak? 40. You saw the peak difference is not even that different to begin with. So again, could be an issue with Steel Nomad Lite, could be an issue with Apple clocking it lower. I couldn't tell you.
And it's not that much of a difference. So is this thing of the ray tracing cores, which have been updated. There you go, guys. That is a much better improvement. We have 28 FPS with M5 compared to 18.4. That is over 50% faster.
That's over 50% difference, actually. Yeah. In fact, it's quite a bit above that, right? It's 28 versus 18.4. Comes out to 52%. Okay, it's not that much higher. Yeah, and you can see that this test, for some reason, ran about as well as it did on the MacBook Pro. So clearly, it might be hitting some other form of bottleneck in Steel Nomad Lite. A bottleneck that's not necessarily reflected in real-world games, but I mean, it is a result, right? And Riley has already complained about the use of artificial benchmarks here, so I don't necessarily have to repeat
about
that to you guys.
So if your game has ray tracing in it, well, at that point, it's going to be improved and you'll have a big difference. It'll be a lot easier on the iPad. Now, as far as the previous test, it's just thermally limited. It can't just push the GPU to its full potential because Apple made such a thin tablet.
And again, this is where I also recommend, don't just run the unlimited test. First, run the actual test, no background tasks, nothing. By the way, not even Wi-Fi enabled. You also see that we have a difference in how much battery these devices have, which, yes, I know these are not such meaningful differences, but it's still important to consider that. I'm also not sure if the brightness levels are the exact same between those. So again, this is why sustained performance testing is difficult to begin with. And this one is clearly not the best example of it.
And because of that crazy thinness, I have this FLIR thermal camera. I'm running that test again, and I want to see what we have in terms of temps. Is this going to be crazy hot? So here you guys can see both of the iPads. Interestingly, the hotspot looks bigger on the left with the M4 iPad, and we're reading 37.6, something like that. With the M5, 36.7. A little bit cooler, actually. Let's go back here. Yeah, definitely.
This actually makes a lot of sense because now this is probably looking at it for a GPU perspective, but think about it for a CPU perspective. It's running the same clock speed. Now, contrary to public opinion, you can have higher IPC that comes with higher power consumption, right? More instructions per clock is not magic. Just because you've achieved higher IPC doesn't mean it comes at no extra power consumption cost. But let's for a moment assume it does and just normalize by clock speeds, which in this case are kind of identical, 4.41 versus 4.43. It's basically negligible. And think about the mentioned the uplift of N3P, right? And that's 5 to 10% better efficiency or more performance at roughly the same power draw. It's higher clock speeds at the same power draw, or lower lower power draw at the same clock speeds. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. Now, again, for the GPU, I believe the differences here between the architectures are just so significant that just the node alone does not explain it. But I think that his findings from the MacBook Pro video just don't translate too well here, because even a 5% difference in clock speeds could mean a monumental 10 to 15% difference in power consumption and heat generation, because at the upper echelon of power draw, at that upper echelon of clock speeds, the gains become really disproportional and becomes really hard to achieve those higher clock speeds.
Hotter with the M4 version. So could it be that they are actually running a little bit more power to that older GPU, and Apple is running less to not have your iPad get?
Or there are minimal changes in the actual heat generation here. When you're looking at such small differences like 1 watt, it's really impossible to ascertain.
Super hot, that's crazy. Now I have to be honest, I'm a little bit disappointed because in the MacBook Pro, when we tested...
And again, you should be testing real games at this point, right? Like, look at what Mr. MacRide did, which we'll look into a future video, or even Andrew Tsai. Like, they test actual games. So the fact that he is that stuck on stuff like... Geekbench and artificial benchmarks, that's a little bit disappointing. Let's look actually into their analysis of the Wi-Fi 7 chip, the N1 versus the previous generation.
Right here, let's go ahead and run it. And
also, he makes no reference to power consumption because they clearly didn't normalize the testing the same way they did on the MacBook Pro. But again, that's a methodology complaint.
With our Wi-Fi, it's pretty fast, but I don't think we're gonna see a difference. I guess we'll see right now. And I think this is more of a future proofing. I have Wi-Fi 7 at home, so does Vadim, but for most people, it's gonna take a while, but you can actually connect to all 3 different bands and run them simultaneously. That way, it doesn't have to reconnect, disconnect, and give you faster speeds. Looks like we have 768 right here. Let's see.
Now, this is one unique test, like he didn't run it on repeat or anything like that, but it is a test that I've seen now being mirrored by many other tests.
By 7. Oh, surprisingly, it is going higher, and it is reaching the maximum of our internet. Okay, so that is pretty cool. Okay, holy moly, guys, 358 upload compared to...
Yeah, and this is one thing that I see now very, very often in these kinds of tests, where the N1 seems to have a lot more stable uploads, where previous generation Macs and iPhones, now I believe like the late, I believe like iPhone, all Wi-Fi 7 iPhones and stuff like that already had also better uploads, but this seems to be like just much more stable, while here you might actually hit like 350 or something like that, but then it just will go down, while here it will sustain it better. So that's quite cool.
190. That is pretty sick. And then for download, 926 compared to 768.
Again, this is a test that should be run multiple times in a row, but okay.
So with this new iPad, we can max out future-proof you. And through this USB Type-C port, you can also get the cellular version. A lot of small...
Okay, so they did not test cellular. Okay, so this is about it. We've now been streaming for 2.5 hours. Like, I don't think I do want to look into the entire Marques Apple Vision Pro video. Maybe I'll do that once I actually find more reference material by reviewers who actually focus on this. I would also like to complain about this graph that implies that the Max chips are 2 Pro chips, which is not the case. There was a time when Max chips were fully enabled on binned Pro chips. Nowadays, they're actually completely separate dies. But the Ultra chip is also not 4. I understand it's probably not meant that way. They're probably just were starved for actual space to make it meaningfully larger, but then again, you could also make them into a different shape. Like, for example, the Pro chip could be more less square, right, and more elongated, and then you take that elongated shape and then you make it into a square again for the Max, and then you combine those 2 squares for the Ultra, but then for starters, you would have to draw the base M chip a lot smaller, and you would also have to draw it bigger over time, at least a little bit. Like M2, for example, was bigger than M1, but then subsequent generations have roughly had the same size. That's one thing how Marquez gets stuff wrong. So he brings up that some things are basically the same here, 12 cameras and stuff like that, same thermal system, same fans, same vents. Should be noted, we don't know that exactly, but we can kind of guess it is. This does move from an M2 to an M5, so even if the M5 in theory is a lot more powerful, it also now benefits from the move from 5 nanometer to 3 nanometer. So there are huge efficiency gains, huge architectural changes, huge memory bandwidth support changes. So he talks about the band.
Gen band, this solo knit band, which was in all the commercials and looks really pretty. But the problem,
well, the last tech I got was the iPhone 17 Pro Max and the AirPods Pro 3. I would actually like to get the new HomePods if they're specifically focused on audio quality, right? And if I can to replace my first generation HomePod that's Wi-Fi 5, not with a second generation HomePod that's Wi-Fi 4, but if I could replace it with two N1 based Wi-Fi 7 supporting HomePods that have really low latency audio communication, I would even buy a new Apple TV 4K for that. And then I would use eARC through my TV to not just play the audio from my Apple TV movies and stuff like that, but also all my game audio from my PS5 Pro that's routed through my TV. In this case, it would go through the cable, the HDMI 2.1 cable between PS5 Pro and my TV. But then its connection, then it would go to the HDMI 2.1 cable to my Apple TV, but then it would communicate to my HomePods with Wi-Fi 7. Now, latency is already not an issue to me with my original HomePod, so I assume that just switching everything to Wi-Fi 7 will just make it a little bit more future-proof, especially when using two HomePods simultaneously. But even more importantly is I would just like future-proof HomePods that I don't have to buy and think, oh, Apple will not give them the same software support. That, like, even my original HomePod, it's still on the latest version. It doesn't have smarter Siri on device, but neither will the second generation HomePod. And I'm not gonna go out and spend 250 euros on a first generation HomePod to stereo pair it with my original. I would much rather take my OG HomePod, maybe put it into another room, or I'll give it to my mom so she can pair it to her own TV. And yeah, like I'm so pissed off that Apple doesn't more regularly update stuff like AirPods Max, HomePod Biggie, right? Like, those are enthusiast products. Yeah, they will not have always the highest sales numbers, but they will appeal to a niche group of people that will probably also upgrade them more often.
is it's pulling up against the back of your head and it's trying to hold all of the weight from the Vision Pro, and it's not great at it. Basically, it ends up sagging onto your nose and really being incredibly painful to have on your face for more than 10 minutes. So there were a bunch of other dual strap bands that came out, including Apple's.
This was actually like kind of a neat beta release for Apple, where we know that they like that knit band thing from the original Apple Vision Pro, but then they made this combination of behind your head and over your head band, but obviously this one is far cheaper and far more clumsy.
That did a better job and distributed the weight better, but they were also pretty ugly. Not that it mattered to most people, but it mattered to Apple. So they spent presumably the last 2 years developing this band, which distributes the weight much better.
And it, oh my God, Apple just, I love Apple's existence in certain markets, specifically for stuff like that. I would love if Apple made this at least a band option for like AirPods Max, right? Like this completely soft, cushiony thing. Like obviously it would need a counterbalance on the back, but yeah, this would be so cool. CapChat, I wish my UFI security cams could connect to Apple HomeKit. Do they really not? That's surprising.
across the back and top of your head. And then
But
this
I
dial
guess they do have like apps, right, that work on like iPhone and stuff like that.
right here, you twist to tighten the back and then pop out and twist to tighten the top.
Yeah, so this is the best engineered virtual reality band on the planet, and it took Apple to do so. What's interesting, this is a metal band. It literally has like tungsten in between here, so this is a counterbalance. A lot of people asked, when will Apple make a lighter Apple Vision Pro? In fact, with the new band, they actually made it even heavier. But because the weight is so much more balanced, this is not just a band that keeps the Vision Pro attached to your face. This also distributes the weight over another part of your head, and this is now a counterbalance to this. This is way, way more comfortable. I believe Marquez placed it down a little bit.
And it is significantly more comfortable.
Okay, no, it is significantly more comfortable, but I've heard from people who actually use like Apple Vision Pro and other virtual reality headsets that it's completely game-changing, basically.
That fabric piece is a bit smaller than it was in a solo knit band because it doesn't have to be as big, but it also now has tungsten, literal metal Vision Pro for $99. So I've been using this new M5 Vision Pro for the past couple days to see if I can actually see and feel the difference that this new chip makes. Because yes, every Vision Pro has all the new software features of Vision OS 26, the new more realistic personas, the pinnable widgets, being able to turn regular
So
photos.
this is one thing that I've seen people who actually use this feature a lot really say M5 is much, much faster at re-rendering like all your like pinned widgets. So if you have like a wall with like 6 to a dozen widgets like that, M2 will think quite a bit before it reactivates all of them. Like let's say you moved from one room to the next. M5 will basically do that instantly. So you can see kind of the difference between a more artificial use case like Marquez, who clearly does not use virtual reality devices throughout his day much, and a more realistic use case by somebody who's a big enthusiast, has really cluttered up their room with widgets and stuff like that.
Goes into spatial scenes, all this cool stuff. So the M5 chip brings a few other incremental improvements here. Basically, it can load apps faster, it can render more pixels, and it's more efficient, so it has longer battery life. Now, the loading apps faster, it's nice, especially since you're stuck in this headset and you can't exactly like reach for your phone or burn time to check notifications while things are loading, so you kind of just have to sit there and wait for it to load.
Yeah, you can. Like, the screen is good enough. It can actually like stream your iPhone screen to it.
So it's welcome that things are loading faster, but it's not exactly a game changer. And then same with things like creating spatial scenes out of still photos. If that's something you do a lot, it's not instant, but it is much faster on this new one. The 10% more rendered pixels, you really aren't going to notice that.
That is actually something that I've seen, and this is why I do want to give this video more time in the future, and why I'm probably going to be wrapping this up now, is because I've heard completely different things from actual reviewers, where this 10% difference, like, not because it's a 10% difference, but with the overall increase in performance and whatever is helping the screen, maybe new media encoders for the cameras too, though it's still using the same R1 chip. Like, it is just more crisp, everything you see. Now, it will not change the actual camera quality. The cameras are still the same. The cameras are still good, but definitely not perfect, even though they are even reused still better supposedly than on something like Galaxy XR. Obviously, it also has other sensors that it relies on, like LiDAR and 3D depth sensing, which from what I understand, the Galaxy XR either doesn't, or it has way fewer of those sensors. I have not done my deep dive into the Galaxy SR yet, so I would like to actually keep the rest of this video and the Galaxy XR content and reviewers who actually know much more about virtual reality for a future video, either tomorrow or some other video in the future, because we've now been streaming for for almost 3 hours. I thank you to anyone who joined. Riley is getting some big mark at the end. Thank you anyone who stayed for that long. I certainly am barely staying for this long, so I'm not sure if timestamps will make too much sense for this video. There's been a lot of back and forth with chat and everything, but if some makes sense, I'll try to leave some timestamps. afterwards. Thank you to anyone who joined. Thank you to anyone who watched. Thank you to anyone who left comments. As I promised, my streaming schedule will be a bit more regular these days, so expect at least one stream a week, hopefully 2 or 3, but not 5 or something like that, just so you know. Yeah, and that's about it. I've been on a bit of a journey with everything in my life, work, family, personal stuff. My weight loss journey continues, so that does impact my streaming time, but this is my favorite hobby at this point, so I do it over reading books, and certainly better than doom scrolling Twitter or something like that, or I combine it with like tech news scrolling and stuff like that. So thank you guys so much for enabling this for me. You can do this just the regular way, watching, subscribing, liking, sharing these videos. Obviously, you can be more engaged by commenting here, becoming a member over in Discord. You can also support me directly whenever you catch me live with super chats and super stickers. Or you can go above and beyond and become a channel member right here on YouTube, or a supporter over on Patreon. Shout out to all the MarkTech Pro Max supporters on both platforms. Thank you guys so much. As always, let me know what you would like to see improved, what else you would like to see me cover, and I'll catch you next time. Thank you guys so much. This is MarkTech, tuning out.